Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Our program is about to begin. Please welcome Semafor's Andrew Friedman.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome, Semafor Economy Day 4. It's been a marathon this week. Hopefully you all have enjoyed the conversations and programming. I'm Andrew Friedman, General Manager and Head of Public Affairs and Corporate Partnerships at Semafor, and thank you so much for being here with us today. Semafor was launched 3 years ago at a time defined by information overload, eroding trust, and accelerating complexity. We set out, though, to provide the antidote: fair-minded, transparent, global intelligence for the new world economy. Semafor World Economy truly brings that vision to life. It is now the largest global gathering of CEOs in America, convening more than 500 CEOs and hundreds of top leaders across business and government from more than 89 countries annually here in Washington, D.C. The discussions you'll hear today, and hopefully you've been able to tune into quite a few of them this week already, they're driven by Semafor's global newsroom, who've gathered here from our bureaus in Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Gulf. Our conversations will focus on helping leaders navigate extraordinary complexity by curating and surfacing the richest insights, ideas, and diverse perspectives on the new world economy. This morning's session that you're all about to see, Powering the Future, it brings together conversations unpacking how nations are balancing the race toward renewables and nuclear with the immediate pressures of AI-driven demand, grid reliability, and energy security. Before we get started, though, I'd like to express our gratitude to Chevron on their partnership on today's session and for being a supporting partner of Semafor World Economy. We're incredibly grateful for their support in helping us create a space for independent, intelligent, live journalism. And with that, let's get to the news. Thanks again for being here today. Cheers. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Please welcome Semafor's Andrew Friedman. Please welcome Dr. Mehmet Oz of the United States Department of Health and Human Services and Shelby Talcott of Semafor.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thanks for joining us at the Semafor World Economy. We have a lot to talk about, but I want to start with robotics and AI because this is the Powering the Future panel. You've been a pretty big proponent of integrating AI and robotics in healthcare, especially when it comes to things like ultrasounds and rural America. I first wonder, how would that work? Should women in rural America prepare for robot prenatal care?
Yes, and the reason is that they're governors who know that their entire counties, for example, in LA, which means lower Alabama, if you live in Alabama, don't have obstetrics care. And so we have a maternal mortality problem, as you know, in this country. And one of the reasons is this very mediocre prenatal care in many situations. So you catch the problem at the delivery, and you'll often save the baby, but not the mom. So the idea that you don't have those services at all versus a robotic run ultrasound, or now I'm seeing actually just wands that a layperson could run over the belly of a pregnant woman and feed that data back for AI analysis, and obstetricians and experts in the area could look at it as well. That's an uplifting opportunity. And these technologies, they're used in other countries as well. It's just an opportunity for us to catch folks who otherwise fall through the system. But I'll give you an even better case use. You have a lot of mental health care issues in rural America where life expectancy is almost a decade shorter than many other parts of the country. And their ability to access healthcare services is devastatingly low. And we can't pay enough money to get people to help those individuals. So we're going to have to use remote solutions. And those are exciting opportunities, because if we can get these programs to work better in rural America, we can use those same insights in urban America. And that's why the president and Congress wisely decided to invest $50 billion in rural health care. That's, by the way, 50% more money than Medicaid normally puts into rural healthcare systems. And so you don't put that kind of extra money in every year for 5 years just to pay the bills. You do that because you want to transform the system, allow it to work differently than it's ever worked before, and these kinds of novel approaches will be there. But can I make 2 preamble statements, Shelby?
Sure.
If you don't mind. The first thing is, I came here to recruit you. We need more people at CMS and Health and Human Services. This organization obviously has been able to attract some of the top people in the country for good reasons. So many of you are probably thinking about how you can make a difference, because you're in the change business. And you might find it entertaining to be in government, especially at this generational opportunity. And the second big message that I want to deliver, because you've asked about AI already, is we can't do any of this unless we have access to data. So problems that cause friction in the healthcare system are profit centers for some companies. And those companies are not in the right business anymore. We're going to de-risk a lot of the changes that are required to allow data to flow freely. Some of those problems are with us at CMS. I don't know how many of you know COBOL programming, but we need engineers who know COBOL programming, because in 1979, when the system was built at CMS, which has not been changed since, that's how it was created. And so we are upgrading for the first time the fundamental architecture for how we do billing at CMS. We're also going to adjust, not just for Medicare, but for Medicaid services as well. We have in budget, getting money from Russ Vought and OMB is not so easy. And because they're appropriately tight-fisted with taxpayer money, but they are asking and encouraging us to invest in these areas because they know the downstream benefits are huge. Now, some of them I think are going to be uplifting, like our ability to deliver AI-supported services for the first time to the American people with tools like the Access model, which just launched, which is a CMMI mechanism. Abe Sutton runs CMMI, brilliant young man who's crafted a beautiful way for us for the first time to support technology advances so the tech industry can get off the sidelines and come work with us and build apps to connect with the American people. And we have lots of other ideas along those lines. All of that's going to be possible now because of AI, which is, again, why many of you or your families or people who work for you or people you work for should be thinking about coming into government for this unique opportunity to make a difference.
What would you say to Americans who are hearing about the idea of integrating AI and robotics more into healthcare and are concerned about the potential for job loss as a result?
The bigger concern, I think, is the possibility that AI doesn't do what's best for you as it gives advice. That it gets manipulated, it loses its way, hallucinates, forces take control of how you get advice that may not be actually serving you. There's going to be, obviously, debates about the impact on jobs. I actually think it'll create lots of opportunities for people because they're going to be healthier. It's a very different scenario I envision, but just before, even in the next few years before our administration is complete, and has finished its tasks, because if we can get the average American to get access to the care that they should want, it will allow them to reach a higher level of success in what they want to do in their lives, including, by the way, participating in the workforce. And just to put a number on it, because I think it's a shockingly large benefit to have a healthy population. If America is doing its best for its people and our workers are feeling so healthy, so vibrant, so with it, that they want to stay in the workforce for even one more year, that's worth almost $1 trillion to the U.S. economy. $1 trillion. That's $300 billion in tax revenue. It starts to deal with a lot of the things we're worried about in just our basic management of budget. Plus, there's the human value of you being able to be vibrant enough to walk your daughter down the aisle or participate in raising your grandchildren, all the things that happen when we have a healthy older society. AI unlocks that, because right now I have trouble talking to the 170 million people we cover with government health care. Think about that. 170 million people, and I have tens of millions of email addresses, but I really can't talk to folks in a way that's that empowers us as the folks paying the bills to help them use the money more wisely and get the most out of the healthcare system. This, Medicare and Medicaid are beautiful, the crown jewels of the social safety net system of the country. And if I could just connect with folks and get them to do things that are in their own best interest objectively, we would be benefiting all of us. I'll give you one concrete example, Shelby. So we give an annual wellness exam to every American on Medicare. 68 million people are allowed to go to a doctor once a year with no out-of-pocket expense. It's all yours. Why do we do that? It's so important for us to make sure that you're taking care of some basic preventative issues. What percentage of Americans actually take us up on that free visit to a doctor? Less than half. Why don't they go to a doctor? Well, they're healthier than the other people. Or so they claim. But we actually have claims data. I know that they're getting sick. And I know they're getting sicker more often than the people who go to a doctor. So ignorance is not bliss. They're given a free exam. They don't take it for whatever reason. They're actually sicker than the cohort that does go to the doctor. If I can engage them, meet them where they are, if our brilliant folks at CMS can build digital tools, AI-based, sometimes with robotics as well, it'll make a big difference. Robotics offer a lot of promise because there are some places that I know we have staffing issues that are hard to overwhelm, like nursing homes, where although we would love to have more people in nursing homes to take care of our seniors, it's an and all great societies take care of their elderly, they're vulnerable, and we're great people who are going to do it. You just don't have enough nurses. And so if we can use robotics to take care of some of the rote material, delivery of food, so maybe some transport issues, things that I'm encouraged by from what I see, it also will provide us opportunities. So I want us to think about it from the context of the folks who have nothing versus AI or robotics, as opposed to is it better than what we currently have?
And I also want to talk about Medicare Advantage. CMS recently decided to boost Medicare Advantage payments for 2027 by 2.48%. That's a big jump from its initial proposal to almost flatline those payments. One estimate I had seen pegged the extra money for insurers from that at $13 billion. Are you working to make Medicare Advantage plans more attractive? I wonder what's the logic here?
Well, the economy is growing at faster than 2.4%. The health expenses in our system are growing dramatically faster than that number. You know how you've done a good job as a regulator? Both sides hate you. Just the right amount. They're not stoning you, but they're not happy with you. And I think that's what Chris Klump and the Medicare team did quite well. It's hard to imagine not paying anything more because clearly there's inflation. And we don't want to chase the private companies involved in Medicare Advantage out of the system. We want them to stay in Medicare Advantage. We think the programs can be made better, but they're inherently a good idea to use value-based programs. We want to do that in original Medicare as well. You will get better quality care if the people managing you are paid for the benefits you get from the program, the value you obtain, as opposed to the number of times they do things to you. Because there is no way for me to guarantee that doing an extra operation on you makes you better, and so people will just do more operations on you. And a lot of what prior authorization, which is a program that has been misused terribly, it is appropriately disliked by many Americans and certainly almost all doctors, because it wastes time and effort and it doesn't result in kinds of improvements that you see. But on the other hand, without some types of quality control and value, you end up with difficult situations where procedures are overused. And so one good way of just dealing with the whole problem, not getting into the prior auth elements, is to have value-based systems where everyone's doing what they think is bringing value to the system, getting paid more for that. I'll give you a concrete example, skin substitutes. Do you know what they are? Skin substitutes are little patches, little postage stamps they put on wounds. It was historically about a $250 million business. Last year we spent $15 billion. $15 billion. This year we were predicted to spend $25 billion on a product that costs $25 to $30 in Europe and is $5,000 sometimes here because you pay doctors a percentage of the product that they use. We had people in nursing homes getting $1 million of skin substitutes. $1 million. So if you have a value-based system like Medicare Advantage, they never let that happen. Because there's no value to putting $1 million of skin substitutes in a woman in a nursing home with a decubitus ulcer. There are other ways of taking care of that problem. But in original Medicare, there was no easy way for us to deal with that. In fact, in original Medicare, we're trying to support as much as possible the growth of value-based systems like affordable care organizations. And on Monday, I was at an event here in Washington where we launched the LEAD model, which the LEAD model is a more updated, more robust, more effective way for us to encourage doctors to join these ACOs, Affordable Care Organizations. We hope to make, as much as possible, the entire U.S. public taken care of by people who are paid because they're making you better, not because they're doing things to you.
And before we go, I want to have you be able to talk about this. Last month, you had said that New York's Medicaid provided around 5 million people with personal care services. You noted that's an unheard of level of use. Your agency more recently noted that that was a mistake. The real number's around 450,000. Does that undercut your argument about mass fraud, or does your argument about mass fraud as it pertains to New York's Medicaid still stand?
No, it's 100% still a valid argument. Think about these numbers. We're quibbling about whether it's 500,000 people or 450,000 people getting personal care services. I just want to put this in perspective. That is the #1 occupation in New York State. The most important, biggest job, arguably, at least by the state of New York, in New York State, is personal care services. You know what that is? That's people carrying your groceries up the stairs. And those people who carry the groceries up the stairs often live in your house or near you. And so I look at those numbers and I think these are unlicensed people in a very unmonitored setting where it's become a jobs program. The criteria for getting access to these services used to be, if you don't get the service, you'll go to a nursing home. If that's the way that they're used, that's a valid investment of societal resources. But the way that we now think about these services, or we're basically doing things for you that your family used to do for you, transporting you to a doctor's clinic visit, bringing your groceries to you from the store, taking care of balancing your checkbook, or things that aren't classically, I want to pay for hernia operations, right? And you want to have your tax dollars used for cancer cures that will save lives, not throwing it at a program that doesn't seem to be focused on the original purpose of it. And I'll highlight a few other things about this. If you have the #1 job in New York State being personal care services, by the way, the numbers are even bigger of personal care services in California, you have to ask yourselves, why would anyone let that happen? If you're a governor of these states, would you want to have the #1 job in your state, personal care services? Is that really the best way to run and shepherd the taxpayers' money in your state? Then you start to wonder if there are other reasons why they're allowing these things to happen. And I want to just open your eyes to the possibility that there are other benefits that accrue to some of these leaders because they allow these programs to grow so wildly out of control. And if you ask yourself those questions, you realize for some people, these are not a flaw of the system, they're a feature of the system. And I'll leave you with one good example because we started with technology and information and AI. We're using these same tools to catch some of the fraud. Because when I look into these programs, like the ones in New York you mentioned, and California, I'll give you a concrete example. You know what hospice is. At the end of your life, if you have cancer and you're going to die, we allow you to go with dignity, to move out of Medicare. You give up your Medicare, and you go into hospice. There are 5,800 hospice facilities in this, or companies in this country. 1,800. 1/3 of all hospice in the entire country is in Los Angeles. Not California, Los Angeles. How many people are actually dying in Los Angeles? So you look back and think, there's no way you thought that was legitimate. I have news for you. We've now shut down payments to over 400 hospices in California just in the last 10 weeks. So if you really want to deal with the fraud, and you use technology and beta data analysis to find these bad apples with lots of red flags showing that they're taking and stealing money, you can do it. But you have to actually want to stop the fraud. And I would argue this is a moral challenge because this is corruption of the fabric of our society. During COVID, it became evident you could steal from the federal government and people just wouldn't come after you. People looked the other way in the last administration in Medicare and Medicaid fraud. I treasure these programs. The president has said over and over again he loves and cherishes Medicaid and Medicare. He, during the State of the Union, asked that the vice president lead a task force on fraud, waste, and abuse that's government-wide, brings us all together, and it's working effectively. And under the vice president's leadership, we actually shut down a bunch of fraudsters just a few weeks ago in Los Angeles in footage that I think captured the attention of the nation because it shows we're taking these problems seriously. But if you're going to allow people to steal money from our social safety net programs, you have to be honorable and honest with yourself, because these bad people, they will not just steal your money, they will steal your health, they will steal your life. And that's why this administration will not tolerate this level of fraud.
We'll have to have you back next year for
right.
an update on that.
Thanks,
Thank you
Shelby.
so much. Thank you.
Please welcome Senator Mark Warner and Jerusalem Demsers of The Argument.
Senator Warner, welcome.
Good morning.
Ready to talk about some light, enjoyable topics this morning, like AI dislocation?
Nothing better to cheer everybody up.
On 8:30. So how do you use AI?
Pardon me?
How do you use AI?
I don't use it as well as I should. You know, I remember on one of the programs, if you're using AI is just kind of an extended Google search, you're not using it enough. So I'm trying to get better. I try to pose more problems. I have tried to pose, you know, how should we deal with economic dislocation? I'm not sure I got the right answer, but I'm trying to get better. But I do think it's, I've gone from, as a former technology guy, you know, interested, concerned, think it's a big thing, to late last year, oh my gosh, to now, literally hair on fire, cannot believe what I think is going to be dislocation. I think there's three pieces of this. I mean, one is how we deal with the data centers. That's relatively easy. You know, you have to make sure there's not misuse on the power, not passed on to consumers, water, you know, setbacks. I think there's security issues with what's happened with Mythos. The ability for that tool to literally break in to almost any of our most secure systems, that's a holy heck moment, and I'm glad that they have put together the group to try to look at testing. I think it raises a bigger issue about what should be the protocol before any of these new tools are released, because this is just Mythos, and what's next. And then the one I'm just shocked at is economic dislocation. Now, I am an AI optimist. I do think there's going to be great innovation. I do think there'll even be, you know, great job creation, long haul, you know, 6 to 8 years. Short term, next 2 to 4 years. I've gone to literally terrorize. I know one of the major telcos had talked to me. My background was in telcos. You know, 41,000 customer service agents. They think they can get by with a couple hundred. Major law firm didn't hire a single first-year associate. I think the traditional, you know, what's the default major for most kids going to university is business administration. I think those BA degrees are frankly not going to be worth that much. And I have yet to talk to somebody who has said, all right, this is the solution on how we get through it. You know, we mentioned backstage. If we went way, way back in time, 4 years ago, we would have thought maybe the right choice was teach everybody to code. That's not going to be the answer. We may need, you know, one of the things I thought, at least to provoke a response, is maybe we ought to be paying all those, you know, freshmen in college to switch from being a business major to being a nurse or in healthcare fields. But I think we're going to need a pretty radical transformation. And if we simply do a traditional government training program, we're going to screw it up.
So I want to get into why you are, quote unquote, terrified about what's going to happen in AI in the labor market. But first I want to talk a little bit about the polarization within the parties around the AI issue. And I mean, when you look at usage of AI, Republican staffers are more likely to report having used it. The DNC this week, Axios reported that its staffers are barred from using Claude or ChatGPT, though
that seems strangely, a little crazy to me.
Strangely, they're allowed to use Gemini for some tasks. I don't really know what the reasoning for that is. But what do you make of this sort of partisan difference?
I'm not really sure I buy the partisan difference. I mean,
well, the RNC isn't banning its employees.
Well, the RNC is not banned, but I think it was been fascinating to watch, at least at the Senate level. I remember when we first started having these AI sessions, and we had, 35, 40 senators show up. I still remember when Schumer did the one where we had all of the big AI guys, and everybody raised their hands saying they wanted to check regulation. Having lived through a totally unsuccessful effort to put any guardrails on social media, I do, think my tech friends, they all raise their hand on regulation until you put words on the page. Mm-hmm. But I saw from 35, 40 senators participating. I had a series of bipartisan efforts. The crowd went from 35 to 40 to 10 to 3, because this is really hard to kind of grasp, get your arms around. I don't think it's partisan. I think it's more future past rather than left right. But
so the DNC is stuck in the past.
I think that's not breaking news. But I wish I had run into someone. And again, there's very few people, and maybe somebody in the crowd's got the answer. But we all kind of describe how we make jobs AI adjacent. I've yet to see the there on that. Mm-hmm. And again, I think there will be productivity. I think there'll be job increases. I think there'll be innovation. But boy, oh boy, this short term, next couple of years, the stat I use, recent college grad unemployment's about 9%. I believe it'll go to 30% within the next 2 years. And that will have a dual effect of not only making that age cohort appropriately concerned, but an awful lot of parents and grandparents who help finance that education pretty pissed off. So how we get this right, and what I've been trying to implore, we need the tech community, the hyperscalers, to both help us through the transition and also help pay for it.
So 30% is a big number. I know you're restricting yourself to recent college grads there, but that's still really, really high. How did you get to that number?
I got that number simply because I think most CEOs are not being, what they say to me privately about the amount of job elimination that they're looking at is not what they're saying publicly. I think they're hesitant to literally, say the full truth because they're afraid it's going to freak people out. And, I think it will come less in the form of we're going to go out and fire X number. I think it's just the incoming, I don't know a single firm where their incoming class of new hires is not a half or a third of what it was even a few years back.
So as a journalist, I will often come across people telling me that, this is the issue they're working on is the most important issue. It's extremely important that I pay attention to this. I spent 100% of my time working on it. And with AI, similarly, I observe this strange gap between the rhetoric that I hear and the actions that are being proposed. And you yourself referred to the legislation that you've been working on AI and job dislocation as being small incremental steps. So,
right. I mean, things like we've got a commission similar with the cyber solarium. We've got efforts to try to correct with Josh Hawley, for example. I've got a bill. Let's get the good data. Mm-hmm. BLS doesn't really collect the appropriate data. We need all those things. But I think at least I have yet to see an effort that I think meets the moment. Now, I do think I would urge for those of us who follow it, what's playing out right now at the state budget level in Virginia, mm-hmm. since we are data center capital of the world, could be a precursor of what's happening everywhere. There is a readjustment. I don't want Virginia to go back and take away the tax breaks, because I don't think we should break the rules. But I do think the industry is already literally offering in the hundreds and hundreds of millions. My goal would be to make sure those funds, or try to urge my friends in the legislature and the governor not to simply put whatever comes out of that into the general pot, but we really need to have this funding, what this job retraining effort could and should look like.
But on AI and jobs, what would it look like to take more than small incremental steps? What would it actually mean to meet the moment here? What kind of legislation would be proposed? What would you want to see?
Well, I think it would start with potentially, what are the jobs not going to be disrupted? Now, I know it's like elevator crane operators or something. I get a little frustrated with particularly some of the folks from our top tier universities who always say, and this is going to be such an injection in the traditional trades. I believe there will be a upswing in plumbers, electricians, etc. But if you ask that same audience, like a smart one like here, how many of you are sending your kids to trade school right now? Grandkids to trade school. So, the rhetoric sounds good. It's not where we think we are sending our own children. And I do believe part of the reason we got to get this right is, if we go way back, 30 years ago with globalization, the jobs that we're losing in like my state were the old textile jobs. Mm-hmm. What we're talking about now are our kids who've done everything we've asked them to do. Study, work hard, go to a good school. And I think the fear level and the concern level is huge. And again, I come back to my opening comment. I've yet to have somebody say, here's the solution set. I do think, a radical thinking in terms of, redirecting people, for example, into a healthcare field, lots of caregivers, mm-hmm. lots of needs there, not exactly the careers that we necessarily would have planned for, but I think ought to be out there. I do think there are easy ways to think about funding this. For example, if you simply got rid of accelerated depreciation mm-hmm. On most of the data centers, you could generate a lot of revenue. And the question again, even if you define the problem, who pays? Should it be NVIDIA and Jensen in terms of the making the bullets? Should it be the large language model? Should it be the companies that are using these tools? I think where it probably will result, the place to extract a toll or something, maybe the data center, since that's already where a lot of the pushback is coming. Mm-hmm. But I think it's going to be so much more radical, and the reason being, just looking at what Claude has done in first quarter of this year, what it's done to the software industry, what it's done to the HR industry. A major top brand name VC that's a friend of mine said he is preparing to write all of his software investments down to zero. And that's 35-40% of his portfolio. So that may not be the case, but if he's even 50% of that being the case, I think we're looking at this dislocation. And there would not be this literally trillions of dollars if people didn't feel there was going to be enormous productivity gains. And our record of getting people through transitions, again, go back to globalization, it's been pretty pitiful. We completely got caught off guard on, not caught off guard, but the fact that we couldn't even get guardrails on social media doesn't give me a lot of hope that we're going to sort this out. But the immediacy of this problem and the challenge of if we get it wrong, my fear is if we get it wrong, you could have populism from both the left and the right come together and try to shut off this innovation. That would be the worst. This is clearly a place where, as somebody that believes national security is actually technology competition, this is not a place where we want China to win.
So I want to ask you about this reaction to data centers, because, you're from Virginia, as you mentioned, data center capital of the world. My father lives in Leesburg. I can see them when I go visit him. The Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative AOC put out a data center moratorium. And many observers, if you're terrified of what AI is going to do, if you're terrified that it's going to lead to 30% unemployment amongst recent college grads, dislocation like we've never seen in the labor market, left and right populism potentially upending the American political system, it doesn't seem that crazy to say, okay, well, why don't we just pause this? But you called it idiocy.
Well, I probably shouldn't use that term.
No, it's fun.
No. I just think I don't think it's going to solve. The idea that we can stop this innovation, the idea that we can put the genie back in the bottle, that is not going to happen.
Well, why not?
And because these tools are already unleashed into the world, they're not going to be taken back in. I do think the Mythos effort coming out of Anthropic, the fact that they were responsible enough to on their own say time out and then put this coalition together to say, we ought to test a little bit more. I do think the notion of whether government or independent researchers having some testing pattern before the tool is released or the next model is released, because I know from what Anthropic's working on, Mythos will soon be surpassed with a tool that is exponentially more powerful. So again, I think we have to think about this. Data center is relatively easy, but that's where a lot of the heat is right now. How we do put some constraints in making sure they don't pass on, for example, utility costs. I think the security piece of trying to have, somebody invented. I claim that I invented cell phones the way Al Gore did the internet. I did start Nextel, but is that security piece? There are, as I talk to folks on the frontier, researchers, they do terrify me at times, and the number of frontier researchers who are deciding, well, I'm not going on to the next job, I'm going to go study poetry and spend time with my kids. That's a fairly, frightening indictment. And then we've got this dislocation issue. And I do think many of the companies realize they can't just sit back and say, not our problem. So how we get them to the table in a group, maybe on a revenue source that we could agree on jointly, but what the there is going to be in terms of how we make, work truly AI accessible, adjacent, whatever terminology we want to use. Mm-hmm. I think we have to put all our heads together and really have a sense of urgency to this that I'm not sure we've seen yet.
Senator, I could talk to you about this forever, but I'm getting the signal we have to go. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Please welcome Singapore Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Trade and Industry, Gan Kim Yong and Clay Chandler of Semafor.
Please. Morning, everyone. Deputy Prime Minister, thank you so much for being here with us.
My pleasure.
Delighted to see you here at SOE. I wonder if I could just open with a simple question and ask you how what's going on in the Gulf right now is affecting Singapore's economy. Singapore is, of course, one of the most globalized and interdependent countries in the world, but it's sort of removed from the actual regional crisis. How is it being affected?
Well, Clay, you know Singapore well, and you visited Singapore several times. You know Singapore is really a small, open economy, and trade is 3 times our GDP. And therefore, to ensure supply chain continuity, free flow of trade is very critical for our economy. And with the disruption in the Middle East, I think the entire supply chain is being disrupted. not just for Singapore, I think for the rest of the world. And Singapore being dependent on the rest of the world, I think our supply chain is also severely impacted. First and foremost, I think flow of oil and energy is being disrupted. Second of all, after that, you see that the products that are derived from oil and gas, such as fertilizer and so on, is also being disrupted. And what this means is that prices are being driven up. It happens not just in Singapore. I think in the U.S. you're also seeing gasoline prices going up. In Singapore too, prices are rising and the cost of transport will also go up. And as a result, many of the daily necessities, the prices are also on the rise. So I think this is what we are seeing. But in the longer term, the rising prices will also depress demand for products and services. And for Singapore, we are a very small economy. We depend on the world economy's growth in order to drive our own economic development. And when the global economy demand slows down, the economic growth will slow down. And that will indirectly affect Singapore's overall economic performance. So this year, we think that the first quarter, based on our prelim results, our estimates is for first quarter, we are able to achieve about 4.6% growth. That is below our original projection. I think for the rest of the year, we can see continued drag on the economy because of these uncertainties going forward. So I think it affects us. But that's also a reason why we have to address these short-term issues, but at the same time, keep our eyes on the longer-term horizon to plan forward what happens after this crisis, how do we recover from the crisis, and how do we ensure that the economy will continue to be resilient in the long term.
For those of you who've been to Singapore or get a chance to go, I would really recommend going to see the container port. It's one of the great wonders of the world. This is the busiest container port in the world, and they still don't have enough berthing space for all the ships that go through it. And so the lines to get into this, of ships extend miles out into the ocean, and they have to sort of manage that. I remember visiting during the, when there was all this trouble with the Houthis, and people were rerouting their ships to different ports to deal with that. That actually benefited the port of Singapore. But this time it's not that way, right?
Well, I must say that nobody benefits from war. I think even if it is a short-term surge, even during the disruption earlier on, the previous disruption, we have more ships calling on us, but many of them are unscheduled calls because of the disruption. And there's the port becomes very busy, and we need to manage the traffic to ensure that we are able to deliver and serve our customers well. But you're right that our ports are very, very heavily used. Even today, it's still very heavily used. And that's why we are actually in the process of relocating the entire port to the western side of the island so that we have more capacity. We are able to deal with demand in the future, not just immediately. So I think this is something that we plan in the long term. So we hope to be able to serve our customers better. But in the meantime, I think the rise in the transport costs is going to hurt everybody. So I think at the end, there will be no winners. We are glad that we are able to play a role in supporting some of these supply chains to ensure that they are able to deliver to their customers in time. And if our port is able to play that role and help transshipments that may come through, may be rerouted through Singapore, we're happy to provide that service.
I mean, it also causes problems for your airport, which is, again, one of the busiest and greatest in the world. But if fuel prices are going up, that slows traffic, right?
Yes, I think all of us know airfares are on the rise because air fuels are now more expensive. Energy is more costly. But on the same note, I'm curious that you should mention airport too. We are also developing the airport. We are building our 5th terminal, and the 5th terminal will have more than double the capacity of the current terminal 1, 2, 3, and 4 together. So I think we are expanding capacity to meet longer-term demand. The key is really we need to cast our eyes on the longer term, not just on the immediate future. We have to address an immediate problem, but we mustn't lose sight of the longer-term strategies.
So the news in the last couple of days has been that the Trump administration has decided to deal with the conflict in the Gulf by putting up its own blockade to keep ships from going in and out and shutting down all traffic. And it seems to be working by and large. I saw a video clip last week of, I think, your foreign minister saying, we could not condone any closure of shipments, and of ports like this, we wouldn't support this proposal of allowing Iran to collect tolls on ships that come back and forth. And the rationale he gave for that was, we live right next door to one of the world's most important choke points, which is the Straits of Malacca. So what's the Singapore position on the U.S. blockade?
Well, let me put it this way. I think my foreign minister, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, has made it very clear.
Right.
I think Straits of Hormuz is what we call a strait that's used for international navigation.
Right.
And for straits that's used for international navigation under UNCLOS, UN Convention on Law of the Sea,
right.
Ships and aircraft must be given unimpeded transit passage through the straits.
Right.
And Straits of Hormuz is one example. Right. And therefore, it is in principle that we are not able to support any negotiation, because this right is not negotiable.
This is a bedrock principle.
That's right. And because it also has a direct impact on our Straits of Malacca and Singapore, which is also another straits that's used for international navigation. Right. And therefore, we have to ensure that the strait continue to be free and to allow the transit passage for all ships and aircraft. So I think it's a matter of principle. As you know, Singapore always works on principles based on the interests of Singapore, and therefore we are consistent in our position.
There's been a lot of discussion here this week about artificial intelligence. That's maybe the second big topic after what's going on in the Gulf. And there is both excitement and trepidation about it. One of the things that, as I look at Singapore, I'm always thinking about is that, we talk about big data, we talk about this notion of AI superpowers, and that to be world dominating in AI, you've got to have access to lots of data, you've got to have a place to build data centers, you've got to have access to lots of energy, and be able to build this kind of compute infrastructure. Singapore is a very small island, doesn't have a giant population. Tell us how Singapore is trying to compete in an age of big data and AI superpowers.
Well, I think you just had a session just now on AI, I suppose. I heard about it at the backstage. But AI is very important, I think not only for Singapore, I think for the rest of the world too. AI is going to be a game changer, and it's here to stay, and it will change the way we work, it will change the nature of jobs, it will change the way we learn, we play, and we live. So I think it's something that we have to be prepared for it. So in Singapore, we take it quite seriously. We have set up a National AI Council that is chaired by the Prime Minister himself. The reason he chairs it is because it requires efforts across multiple ministries and agencies to be able to manage this together. And as you rightly put it, we need to carefully balance the need for AI governance, at the same time create room for AI innovation. And for us, we want to have the best of both worlds, to have a strong governance system, to give confidence for people to be able to develop and deploy AI solutions. But at the same time, we also want to have space for researchers, for solution providers to develop their solutions so that they're able to experiment it. So I think this balance is very critical, and that is why we also have a new national AI strategy, which we just refreshed. And under this strategy, we have three key thrusts. The first is to develop leaders in champions in AI, to work with companies to integrate AI into their business model end to end. It's not just adopting AI applications here and there, but the entire review of the business model to become AI native. So I think this is something that we hope to be embarked on. The second thrust is really to look at AI missions. We have 4 key missions, 4 sectors of key AI mission in advanced manufacturing, in connectivity, in finance, and in healthcare. There are many challenges in these 4 sectors, and when we confront with AI, we do want to use this mission to attract AI solutions providers to come to Singapore, to work with us to solve these solutions, these problems, these challenges. And if we have solutions for these challenges, many of these solutions are applicable to the rest of the world. So we hope to be able to become a magnet for AI experts and professionals to be here. In order for us to bring them together, we have a third thrust, and that is to develop an AI park, where all these professionals and leaders in AI can come together, create an ecosystem, and generate synergy so that they work with each other very efficiently. They can talk to each other. When one has a solution, can apply to the rest. And when one has a problem, the rest can come and help solve the problem. And this way, I think we will speed up the development of AI. But AI also requires us to collaborate and work with other countries, other players. U.S. is one key player in AI, and we are very happy to look for opportunities to work with U.S. companies and leaders in AI to develop AI solutions in Singapore.
And you're also working with Chinese companies, which makes Singapore quite unique. I mean, it's one of the few cities that I've ever been where you can go into the CBD and look at a big office building, and there's the giant logo for Microsoft and on one side, and then ByteDance. They're in the same office building on top of each other. You wouldn't see that in the U.S. Talk to us about that data center problem, though. Singapore has very limited space,
yes.
Limited high-cost energy. A few years back, you imposed a data center moratorium.
You know Singapore well.
You were afraid you were putting up too many of them. And you've relaxed that a little bit, but still pretty strict environmental standards. Where are you going to put all the data centers necessary to fuel this revolution?
Yes, I think data center is very critical for our AI strategy, but we have a very selective strategy towards the development of data centers because of the energy issue. Singapore has very limited alternative energy source. We depend mainly on the natural gas. We have solar, but because solar requires land, and Singapore is a very small island, as you put it, we have very limited solar power. So the only way that we can deal with it is to work with our neighbors. So we now have a collaboration with Malaysia, Johor, which is to our north, and Batam, Indonesia, to our south. So we have data centers that are put in these two places. They're close to Singapore, so they're connected to Singapore. We operate as one system, but at the same time, because they have supply of green energy, so it's easier for us to put the data centers there, and we work together, and it's a win-win outcome for all three of us. But at the same time, we are also beginning to allow more data centers to be set up, and we are very careful and selective in doing so. We want to make sure that the data centers that we give out to are used for very critical operation and functions. We don't really want them to store all your birthday photos, and so I think that you can store somewhere else. That's not so critical. But for banking data, transaction data, business data, they're very critical for us. We do want to allow them to have capacity to have these data centers in Singapore. If you need to develop AI systems, you need to have access to the data center capacity. That's what we are focusing on. But if you want to store your birthday photo, that's fine. You can store somewhere else. And if you need to retrieve them, it takes an hour to retrieve them. I think that's livable. That's okay.
Well, it's very interesting for Singapore because, obviously, financial services industry is a pillar of the Singaporean economy, and other types of services needs to be able to have rapid access to, high-quality data and the very best AI tools that there are. How much does it help you that you are so connected with undersea cables?
Well, that's very critical. It's not just a cable, it's also a physical above-sea connectivity in terms of air, land, and sea. So I think it's important for Singapore to be a transport hub so that experts and businessmen from all over the world will come to Singapore and do business with the region. So data is similarly, we have the same concept. We have cables connect to everywhere so that we are able to use Singapore as a center to manage headquarter operations, and key data are held in Singapore. At the same time, we are able to operate with data centers distributed around Asia Pacific. So I think this is our model of operation.
I want to ask you about regulation, because obviously different economies have different views about how AI should be supervised. In the U.S., our policy seems to be that it shouldn't be supervised at all, and there are no regulations really whatsoever. And the Trump administration is opposed even to states trying to impose restrictions. Of course, the Europeans are much more restrictive and cautious in thinking about privacy and human rights and all these kinds of things. And the Chinese have a very kind of industrial policy kind of focus in how they regulate it. But where is Singapore's governance policy?
Well, it's interesting you should ask this, because one lesson that we learned from the past crisis, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's Ukraine disruption, war, or whether it's Iranian conflict, I think one lesson that we learned is that trust is very important. And the data is also fundamentally built on trust. So I think it's important to understand that Singapore is a trusted partner in many of this, and that's our key strength. And in order for us to preserve that trust with our key partners, it's important for us to put in place sufficient governance and guidelines. So we developed a framework for AI models and how we can make sure that the development of AI is properly guided. There's a governance. And it is also important for us to develop this governance framework not in isolation, but with the like-minded partners. So we work with many partners, like-minded partners, to develop these guidelines so that they are effective and practical. But at the same time, we have also the concept of sandboxes that allow development to take place. We don't have tight regulation, but we watch them and monitor, so make sure that they don't run wild. And once some of these practices are well established, then we begin to develop regulations and rules so that we are able to govern the future development and application of these solutions. So I think we take a calibrated approach, on one hand ensuring that there's sufficient governance and guidelines to preserve the trust that we have with our partners. At the same time, enough space for innovation to happen, for experiment to take place, so that new solutions can emerge. If you are too tight, I think you just can't move. If you are too loose, then they will run wild. So I think it's a very careful, calibrated balance. And I must say this balance is also very dynamic, depends on the evolution, depends on the development of technology. You need to be prepared to be nimble, to adjust these regulations and rules as you move along. And you have to keep your eye on the ball to make sure that the development is according to the guidelines and governance you've put in place.
Big tech companies in Silicon Valley have spent hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars to develop these frontier, cutting-edge, closed models. China, embracing open source, has its own different kind of paradigm for how to embrace AI. But Singapore is kind of going its own way in some respects. It's got it's working to develop its own LLM that's for Southeast Asia, where of course there are 10 different countries and there are hundreds of different languages and dialects and that sort of thing. And I often hear people in Singapore complain that the Silicon Valley AIs are really not set up to deal with all the different cultural variations that you get in a place as rich and diverse as Southeast Asia. But does it really make sense for Singapore to invest in building its own platforms like that?
Frankly, we are not focusing too much on developing frontier models because you take a lot of resources and a lot of commitment and a lot of investments. But for Singapore, I think there are companies who are developing some of these frontier models. We don't prohibit them. But our focus really is in focusing on deployment of these solutions, development and deployment of these solutions. And that's why I mentioned about champions of AI missions and so on. It's focusing on application cases, working with companies to see what will be able to be suitable for them. How do we bring them along the journey of this transition? And it's not just about applying AI solutions, it's also about managing the workforce. You need to train the people so that they are ready for the new applications that are AI-driven. So they need to be AI literate, be able to be confident in using AI applications. I think this transition is non-trivial. It's not just about the solution, but it's about the transition journey. And we need to manage the process carefully so that you do not end up with unemployment, with displaced workers, with destroying jobs. But at the same time, use AI to create more opportunities and more jobs for people.
DBM, I'm afraid that's all the time we have, but thank you so much. This has been a fascinating course on Singapore's policies.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Please welcome Michael Polsky of Invenergy and Tim McDonnell of Semafor.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. So happy to be here with Michael Polsky, CEO of the largest privately held power producer in the U.S. And Michael, you have a fascinating life story. Came to the U.S. from Ukraine in 1976 with nothing in your pockets and not speaking English. Now running this incredible company that spans renewables, gas, grid infrastructure, all kinds of things. Can you just say a little bit about kind of what that journey has taught you and about energy security and what you're sort of taking away from this moment of crisis that we're in the global energy market? How do we need to rethink energy security in this moment?
Yeah, I'm an engineer. I came to the United States in 70s. It was studies in Soviet Ukraine. So I went through all these different permutation of energy. Started with coal, oil, did nuclear power plants here in U.S. designing, then went into independent power industry, doing natural gas, and then later renewables. So my story sort of, I feel like it's energy development stories. But one thing I always say as an engineer, as a technical guy, I look at energy just like other industrial area. We're technology driven. When we have better mousetraps, we try to use them. Before, like I said, when I started was coal and heavy oil. Then we learned how to burn natural gas. Then we come up with gas turbines, obviously. So it's and then we learn how to harness solar energy with solar panels and wind farms, and technology improves. So different technology become more affordable and make common sense. But one thing I always said that we have to look really pragmatically, not politically, and clearly I always feel that really if you really take and be honest to yourself, national security is the energy that you produce locally, and it stays locally. You're not affected by the world prices, world markets, and so on. So really the ultimate energy security is, whether we like it or not, is renewables, because if we produce solar here and wind here and geothermal here, and it stays here and it's subject to the world market. Now we do need other sources of energy as well, and I don't want to mistaken with energy to a lot of natural gas and so on, because with the need of electricity, you just don't have everything in one. You have to use different sources, but I think we have to have everything, and we have to understand the more of we have certain things, the more insulated from sort of bad things we have.
When you look at the political rhetoric around energy in the U.S. and also some of the kind of bureaucratic bottlenecks that we have for permitting, are you worried that the U.S. is, especially if we think about data centers, the future of kind of energy demand in the U.S., that we risk losing some economic competitiveness because of the way we're approaching this challenge right now?
I think, I look at energy as infrastructure. It's basic infrastructure that allow us to power everything else, not just data centers, but the entire economy in a way. And affordability is very important too, right? You cannot afford to pay whatever it is because you will run out of money. So, definitely the more our policy is to encourage everything and let sort of market decide what they're willing to buy, it's certainly policy that makes sense. So I do believe that we need everything at this point. We need natural gas, clearly. We need renewable energy. We need geothermal energy. We need all kinds of sources of energy to power. And I think China is very pragmatic too, right? They understand they may not be as fortunate to have fossil fuels, but they really step in on the pedal big time on the renewables, and particularly with energy storage and enough transmission, they can really become dominant for themselves in energy space.
Is there something else that we can learn from China? I mean, what can we? I mean, it's a very different political system. What can we learn from them or apply from their model to the U.S. that we're not doing yet?
Again, I'm not expert in China, but clearly to me, they understand if they don't have fossil fuels, they have to do something to substitute. I mean, this is just common sense. So they really stepped up on renewable technology, on wind, solar. I mean, on solar, they build in 1 year what we build in a decade here. And they build transmission lines because they understand that solar may be far away from energy, from the load center. They may be in Inner Mongolia, they build huge solar farm and build large transmission line. They do offshore wind. So, and then they electrify transportation, basically relying on that energy to electrify their displace oil from their transportation. So certainly they have a policy that makes sense for them. I'm not saying it totally makes sense for us, but we have to see what makes sense for us. And
On the point about transmission, so this is one of your big projects these days. Grain Belt Transmission Line is the largest private transmission project in U.S. history that you're in the process of putting together, and you had some personal experience with the kind of policy vacillation here. You had a $4.9 billion federal loan guarantee that was approved in the Biden administration, canceled by the Trump administration. How have you bounced back from that? Do you find the U.S. is becoming unreliable as a finance partner for projects like this?
I'm not sure of that, but my point is that what I'm really concerned, by the way, with Biden administration as well, when they did IRA, I told that, they're sort of upside down. I think, in my view, transmission should be number one. I always like to say that when you, as a developer, right, when you build a neighborhood, what do you build first? Roads, and then you build houses. We try to encourage houses, but not the roads. Even with IRA, let's build more renewables, which is great, and what else? Where are these renewables going to go? We talk about interconnection. Interconnection now takes 10 years for people to connect new power plant, even fossil fuel, even now natural gas. Why? It's not because connect this plant to the grid. It's because grid cannot accept this power. So we're really short on transmission, and if I would say that really our main objective need to be build transmission infrastructure so we can generate electricity where it's the lowest cost, move it where the need is. Also, grid, we talk about resiliency, we talk about, what resiliency is, that we're not subject to the weather issues or some other things. So I think improving improving and developing grid that fits sort of our future is very important. And I believe data centers, they have same problems now. They complain it takes years and years to interconnect them. Why? It's mainly not, generation would come, in my opinion, if we would have sufficient grid. Mm-hmm. The problem is a lot of people do behind the meter. Why? Because we just don't have the grid.
So after this loan guarantee cancellation, though, you were able to fix the financing for this project. So Grain Belt is still moving full steam ahead, or did that delay the project a bit?
I mean, we're still working on it. It's not fully, everything is resolved, but building infrastructure takes, unfortunately, could take decade or 2 decades. We've been working on this project more than 10 years already, and still not clear.
No, yeah. Can you say a bit about, so we were talking a little bit about finance here. So Invenergy is a private company. You've had about $4 billion in investment from Blackstone, some other backers. What does staying private allow you to do that maybe publicly traded companies aren't able to do?
Again, this is just my opinion here, but I've been always an entrepreneur. I've always been sort of on the firing line. I've always been sort of, trying to do, move fast and do this, but I've always been also in the development business. Development business is it's not an even business. You could have good times, you can have worse times, low interest rates, high interest rates, better government policy, worse government policy. You could be more successful, you could be less successful at certain times, and that volatility may create a lot of pressure on your stock. If you're a public company, employee morale, they have options, and then suddenly stock goes down 5 times. What are you going to do? What are you going to explain to people? So, and then it takes time to manage your boards, right? I never had to spend time. I spent time running business, not managing my board. So I don't know. This is just me, but I'm sure other people have. Now, the downside, you don't have as easy access to funds as your maybe public company, particularly in the good times. So it's always give and take, like anything else in life.
So an IPO in the future, or no?
I mean, listen, we don't know what the future will be. I mean, we can say here and say never no, never yes, but we will do what makes sense.
What's the next big project that you're looking at? You said you've been working on grain belt for 10 years. If you had sort of your druthers, what would be the next big thing? What's your white whale that you want to chase as the next big thing for Invenergy?
I mean, we at Invenergy, we always look forward. We always look, particularly as a private company, you cannot be, if you're a public company, maybe it's different because, you could sort of raise money in a good time and kind of have less pressure in the bad time. But I say in a private company, you always have to eat what you kill. If you don't make money, you cannot be in business. So we always look into new things. For example, like I just said, we were doing a lot of natural gas. Then we got into renewables. Then we built, the largest wind project in the United States, largest solar project. We still build natural gas. We build LNG, liquefied natural gas to power projects. We got into geothermal business. Storage, by the way, I believe battery storage is really magical technology that it would allow us to do so many new things that we never dreamed before. So we constantly look into the new opportunities. Now, our biggest challenge is to scale up. I think we build more greenfield power than anybody in this country. We build 3 to 5 gigawatts a year, probably ramping up even more in the later part of this decade. So our biggest challenge now is to execute. It's not necessarily create any new technology, but just execute on what we already know.
Right. You mentioned behind-the-meter power and some of the challenges there. This is something that a lot of the AI companies, the data centers are thinking about. How do we bring our own power, kind of get, doing stuff behind the meter, getting away from the grid? What's the risk that you see in that approach?
I think, again, there are a number of risks. Some technical risk, obviously, when you put very large load against sort of island generation. Islanding is not a preferred approach because you never know what could happen. But more importantly, what I see now, another big problem is there are a lot of people that really don't have power generation experience building power plants. And I know we operate 20 gigawatts of projects, and always I hear with technical problems here, something happens here. But nobody really talks anymore about potential technical issues with building power because everybody is so preoccupied on building stuff, then nobody thinks about how we're going to operate this stuff. So I think we need to really make sure that we have enough technical capabilities. We complain about nuclear that because we didn't build nuclear, now we don't have enough engineers. Same right. Even in conventional generation, we have to make sure that people that build plants, they build it in a way that it could be operated in the future, that we would not have issues there. And particularly when you have islanding operation, you don't have a lot of grid. You have to build a lot more, perhaps redundancy, because you cannot just use grid to support you. So that could be an issue as well.
What's in your crystal ball for grain belt? You said it took 10 years to get up to this point. When are we going to be sending electrons down that transmission line? How long is that going to take?
I hope we can send electrons by 2030. I think it's the most consequential project, infrastructure project for the United States at this point, and I hope we can get it done.
2030, we'll be watching. Okay, Michael Polsky, thank you so much for your help.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great.
Please welcome Ignacio Madridejos of Ferrovial, Sadek Waba of I2 Capital, and Shelley Banjo of Semafor.
Hey guys, I'm going to jump in here with the sort of question of the day around the economy. Sadek, you've said an economic reckoning has sort of been coming for a while, but this moment feels different to you. Tell us why.
I think it feels different because we have a whole confluence of events, right? So we've had monetary expansion since 2008. We have COVID. We've had supply chain issues. We've had now a war, which I think people are underestimating significantly. The extent of damage in the energy infrastructure in the Middle East is in the unfortunately, probably in the hundreds of billions of dollars, but it's not just the number, it's the fact that it'll take years to be able to rebuild it. And in that process, you're going to have a fundamental reassessment of both supply and demand chains. People are going to ask them, are asking right now, where do I get my energy? And how am I going to supply the energy that I have because of the routes that are now being challenged, and not for this year, but for the coming years. Add to that, that in the current period, you're going to have inflation in the US, probably, in my view, reaching something like 4% by year end, if not more. Oil is going to be at over $100, and yet yesterday the S&P was at an all-time high. So go figure. I think by my tone, you know where I stand. So that, I think, is the unfortunate situation we're in.
I mean, both of you guys run these big businesses that use a lot of these inputs that are going up, all sorts of different kinds of energy, steel. What is the cost, hikes doing, from your day-to-day business? What are you seeing?
Well, so far we have seen, I would say, a minimal impact, and not relevant with the increases last year of the tariffs. And what we have different businesses. We have a construction, we have airports, we have a toll road business, and mainly based in the US, and each of them is affected differently. But in the case of construction, what we have is a very healthy backlog today. It's less exposed to inflation. 98% of our procurement is very local. And it's more important when you are in the early stages of the construction. So we are not seeing yet, but as you say, what could affect us is a sudden increase in inflation when we are bidding for large projects that is in the design phase. At that time, it may affect us, but if we are forecasting properly, I think it will not have an effect. But we need to follow very closely because these sudden increases may affect us. In general, for infra assets, inflation is good. So because we can recover the inflation with our assets, and we have in most of our assets, toll roads, we have the freedom to set toll rates. So with that, we can recover that above inflation. So in that sense, we are not affected unless the high inflation is affecting growth. And in that case, of course, traffic will be affected too.
But those commodity hits, those aren't impacting you yet. When do you foresee that starting to really build in?
We are not seeing it yet, I will say. So far, it lacks a period of time, and we are not seeing it for the time being. So it has been minimal last year and beginning of this year, but of course, if we continue and we see a 4%, it will be translated also. The key is that we can transfer to customers or to suppliers, and it's something that we have done so far, and we have to be able to do in the future.
You also run a business that with real-time pricing on toll roads.
Yes.
Do you raise the prices? Do you lower the prices at a time like this when gas prices are, going up so high?
Well, for us, it's more related to the value to users. So, in the case of our managed lanes, express lanes, or the 407 in Toronto, the way it works is the value to user, and the value to user is time savings, is reliability, so that you know that you are going to arrive on time. That is very important. In some cases, it's safety. In others, it's convenience. But this is depending on the value to users. And this value is increasing as long as Dallas-Fort Worth or Charlotte is increasing in population and economy. And with that, because we have a lot of freedom to set toll rates, we are increasing. Of course, if you have high gas prices for a long period of time, the effect that you will see is affecting in the economy and the GDP of these cities. And with that, it will have an effect also with the traffic, less congestion, and it will be more difficult to increase. But the value in the long term, we have 50 years concession, so it's a very long time. Even in the case of Toronto, it's a 75-year concession. So we have to think in the long term and the value to users. And what we see is that the value is going to increase over time because these cities are growing and we have something that is very valuable to the users in these places.
In the last 3 weeks, did congestion go up or down?
In the last 3 weeks, that's very difficult to say, but I think that I think that has been following what has been normal, and similar to the past, we still see a lot of value to users of the assets that we have.
But if I may, of course, what Ignacio is talking about is toll roads and the demand for toll roads. And the demand for toll roads is, of course, impacted by GDP or by gasoline prices. I think there's two things. When you think about infrastructure investments, the attractive aspects of infrastructure investments is that you're talking about a basic need. So roads are essential, but of course you are sensitive to some of these parameters. It could be, as you said, income, or it could be pricing of gasoline, which of course impacts us. What you're seeing is the ability to differentiate on a global basis. So we're talking about toll roads in Canada and the US, where there is an essential need. But having said that, there is still sensitivity relative to other economies to the price of gasoline, so it's more elastic. Compare that to, say, India, where you've invested, where we've invested, where the demand is fundamentally different. If you look at traffic growth in OECD economies, it's probably between 0 plus to minus, right, in general. If you look at economies like India, you have a fundamentally different economic paradigm. Their traffic growth is anywhere between 8 to sometimes 15%. And where there is an absolute need to use roads instead of what in the US takes you an hour to go from A to B, in India may take you 4 hours. So any improvement in that basic infrastructure is hugely welcome and therefore quite inelastic. So you have to be able to differentiate in this global economy where you're going to be getting these shocks to be able to say, where is it that I'm putting my investments, and should I be looking to diversify it in a way that I have the stability of industrial economies with the growth that you can see in high growth economies like India?
We're, you guys have been talking about we're investing in 50 years, right? We're a 50, 70, 80-year, sort of time horizon. But in the U.S., it's very hard to get anything done with a, political system that's changing every 2 or 4 years with different administrations there. With this new sort of form of state capitalism that we've been seeing with the Trump administration, is there any opportunity there to create some, to actually use those dollars for infrastructure rather than, taking a stake in Intel or something like that?
I think that what we see in the US is that there is a need for infrastructure. In 2040, it's expected that there's going to be a $4 trillion deficit for infrastructure. And what you see 2050, 90% of the population in the US will live in cities. And some cities are growing more than others. What you say about growth is a thing in general. When you see Dallas-Fort Worth is growing much more above the average of the US. You see Toronto only last year, traffic grew 6%. So I think that being in cities that are growing more than the others, and if you want to grow a city, you need infrastructure. And there is not enough money with the fiscal deficit to do that. That's the role that the private players like us play in order to develop infrastructure faster and more efficiently. And that's why we see a lot of opportunities in the short term. We have a very good pipeline of additional managed lanes. Hopefully we have also a good pipeline of airports. And when you see over the long term, I think private players and developers of infrastructure will play a critical role in this country to develop some infrastructure that is needed to grow.
But you're not big enough. I mean, there's so much need, like you said, in infrastructure. The private sector is obviously feeling that need. But if you're looking at the sort of crumbling bridges and roads and airports in the United States, if we're only rely on the private sector, isn't that also an issue?
No, but what happens, look at some of the projects that we have, for instance, in Georgia. These are projects that are 10 billion projects. And the good thing about this is that you do these managed lanes, these projects probably in Atlanta, that you increase capacity and you don't use any DOT funds. But with that money that they are not using for these projects, they can use for rural roads, or they can do for maintenance of bridges that they have not done in the past. So the key is here that private sector has to take some projects that can pay by themselves and then use the rest of the funding to do these type of things that are very well needed. So we can play a role in different type of things, and I think that with that we can develop much more infrastructure than today. No?
Yeah.
No, you talk about state capitalism, and you talk about the Trump administration pushing for a new industrial policy. To be fair, that industrial policy has been in the making for quite some time, over a decade, where the basis for it is you can come to it through different areas. You can come to it from an America First perspective. We need to rebuild our manufacturing and look for increasing employment, as you heard the administration say. You can look at it from an efficiency perspective. You can look at it from a national security perspective and say, I need to be able to build key manufacturing plants and sectors because we've seen it during the COVID, but we also saw it, our over-reliance on some key critical areas, over-reliance on China. All three lead to what I call observational equivalence, right? So whether you come from this one or that angle, the result is the same. You need some kind of industrial policy to be able to invest in the US, either because you think it's important from a US first, or because you think of efficiency, or because you think of strategic competition with China. All of them lead to, in one way or another, a form of industrial policy. What this administration, in my view, has done is say, I do not have the ability, like other economies, EU or China, to be able to influence key strategic areas unless I have the institution that allows me to do that. And so, short of that, and remember, the president early on in the first months of the administration proposed a sovereign fund. We can talk about that in a minute. But what they've done is to say, because I don't have that instrument, I will look at making key strategic investments. I will take 10% of Intel, because that's critical to our ability to create microchips and so on and so forth. I will take an investment in critical minerals, lithium production in the US, and so on and so forth. I think that's actually a very good thing. Now, what you want to do is, rather than do it on an ad hoc basis, do it in a much more systematic way, in a more programmatic way. By doing that, you also encourage private companies to come and invest in what I would call traditional infrastructure, which is, as you said, is in high need because of the budget deficits that we have, because of the fact that the states are going to, over the coming years, inherit what used to be federal budgets requirements, but will go to the states, health, education, elderly care facilities. All that is gradually moving to the states. So think of the states having to take on more and more responsibilities, including the development of infrastructure, maintenance, airports, and so on and so forth. So at some point, you have to have the public and the private working together in PPPs in a much, much bigger way than what, say, for example, Ferrovial and a few others are doing. You need to be able to have 10 times that size. So you can see the complementarity of the two. One is a strategic initiative to be able to ensure that we have the key components of national security, strategic competitiveness, and employment, if these are the goals that you want, right? And then the second thing is to be able to encourage the private sector to invest in traditional infrastructure in a way that is acceptable ultimately to the users, because that ultimately the people who are going to pay for it.
But do you feel that political will is there to do that?
So the short answer is no, right? Which is why I think this administration had to make a decision. If they wanted to create the right institution, it would have had to go to Congress, and chances are this would never have passed. Let me give you an idea. Go back to congressional hearings to 2003. So that's over 23 years. The language, and so you have the records and the language used in the congressional hearings related to federal infrastructure investments in the US are almost verbatim the same words that have been used 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. It's the same story for the last 23 years. And the result has been very little. So there is a fundamental challenge that we have in the US, which is we are not able to overcome that. And so there is the political will there's the political will to discuss, but I don't think there's the political will to take it into action.
You might have a different point of view. You guys moving your bases here, really going all in on the United States. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think 80% of the value of the company now is in North America, no? And we have key assets in highways, and now we are developing the new Terminal 1 in JFK Airport, no? And the pipeline that we are seeing today is unique. So we have not seen, I agree with you, but in the case of highways, we see for toll roads a pipeline that we have not seen.
Yeah. And the reason is because Ferrovial is very good at what they do, and one of the few companies that do that. So I'm not surprised that they have a great pipeline.
I agree with you, because I think we are a fully integrated player that in the infrastructure sector for greenfield projects, that there are not many companies like us doing that. So because we participate in the whole cycle, no? From the conceptualization of the projects, talking to the DOTs, to the design, to the investment equity and concession for a period of time, construction, we do the construction, we do the maintenance, and then we rotate to third parties whenever the revenues are stabilized, no? And you can predict them very well. No? But there are going to be more and more companies doing that. No? The assets and the business that we have built over these 25 years, no, in the US, the number of opportunities that we see today, we have not seen in the past. And they are very large opportunities, we think, creating value for communities and also for our shareholders. We are bidding this year 2 very large projects in Atlanta and Nashville. Next year, Charlotte, and there will be more opportunities in Tennessee, Georgia, also here. So we see in terms of highways, we see good opportunities. In terms of airports, has been more challenging. We are now building the new Terminal 1. It's a concession until 2060, and it's going to be differential. It's going to be a world-class asset, that nothing that you have seen in the US today in terms of customer experience, in terms of opportunity to grow. But replicating that in other airports is challenging. We don't see the pipeline that we have for highways. And I think it's as you say, with the P3s and private partners, I think that in many places in the US, you will need expansion in airports, and you will need a better user experience than the ones that you have today. No? And it's because there is not enough partnership with private partners in order to accelerate that infrastructure that is needed. No? But I see opportunities in transmission also. We see opportunities in energy, of course, digital infra. So in terms of infrastructure, I see that private players, especially those that are integrated like us, we see a lot of opportunities in the US in the future. And it's going to be more and more, because this $4 trillion deficit in a few years' time, if you want to continue growing, it's impossible to be done with the public deficit that you see today. And you will need private partners that are fully integrated like us with the business model that we have. But I'm more optimistic than you.
How long does it take to build one terminal at JFK?
Well, we started in 2022, so it's not has been 4 years to be built. We'll open hopefully at the end of this year, and most of you that travel to New York, you will experience something very different to what you are used in the US.
That actually feels pretty fast.
It has been very fast, yes. It has been very fast. Part of our business model is delivery. No? We have the I-66 here, the express lanes in the Great Washington area. We opened before it was 5 years, and we opened 6 months in advance. No? So part of our business model, because we invest equity, so it's in our interest that is delivered earlier, because with that we can get the revenues before. No? So we are, in that completed incentives are very aligned with the construction, with the equity, in order to deliver that infrastructure. So that's why I think we do it faster than others. No?
Interesting. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Philip Buckendorf of Airspace Intelligence, Mark Lundstrom of Radia, and Morgan Schulfant of Semafor.
Mark, Philip, thank you so much for joining us. Really excited for this conversation. I wanted to dive right in because, Mark, your Radia is working on building the largest aircraft. What will that be used for?
Sure. So think of Rady as the neoprime for strategic airlift. And so it's an aircraft which is about 7 times the volume of a C-5. So you can have all kinds of really amazing military applications, moving a 6-pack of Chinooks with the blades on and moving the biggest satellites and the biggest rockets of the world. And then there's a dual-use technology as well that we use for moving gigantic energy payloads and just giant cargo in general.
And how do you think, how transformative would that be for defense when it's completed?
Yeah. So right now, the United States and our allies face a huge challenge in strategic airlift. The last time that a C-5 was manufactured, for example, was in 1989. It has less than a 50% reliability rating on a given day. And so the ability to provide a new vehicle that allows you to have reliable strategic airlift is really essential. And then due to the size of this, by being 7 times the size of a C-5, you can have all kinds of new capabilities, be able to move much bigger things and land on dirt strips in foreign deployed theaters. So it should be a very transformative and reliable technology.
And what are the kinds of things it'll be able to move? I mean, how large?
Yeah. So you can imagine just about all the biggest rockets in the world can be moved. And then things like a 4-pack of F-16s, or today when you move a Chinook helicopter, for example, you move it in a C-17 typically, you take the blades off, you take the transmission off. In our case, you can move 6 at a time instead of 1, but you can leave the blades and the transmissions on. So you can show up on a piece of dirt in a foreign deployed theater and be ready for the fight.
Mm-hmm. And Philip, how is the technology that airspace intelligence is working on changing the way airspace is mapped, particularly in the defense context?
Yeah, I mean, I think it applies both to the critical industries and defense. I think we're seeing 2 major paradigm shifts happening at the moment, and they really kind of like intersect. One is, I think the North Star from a just world order perspective, we're moving from a world where stability was the North Star to a world where dynamism is the world star, as the North Star, and everything is much more dynamic and rapid. And that really impacts the industries that relied on stability: energy, air traffic control, defense. At the same time, AI is moving from just making major progress in the world of language into the spatial domain, robotics, but also the orchestration of assets in kind of the real world domains. And that's where we play. It's really the intersection of those 2 transformations and changes that are happening at the moment. So for the airspace, it's a great example because it's an industry where at best most of the institutions, organizations that are facilitating air travel kind of looked at a near real-time picture. They see problems as they happen and then they react to it, and you've all seen that when you travel. You sit at an airport, the flight is delayed because of some weather event. But in fact, you could foresee some of these things happen like 2, 3, 4 hours earlier, and you could already proactively prepare the operations for that. And so that's really what we provide, is we provide more foresight. So decisions are made against a look ahead of the operation versus just playing catch up and fighting reality and negotiating failure.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, from the perspective, in DC, very cognizant of the tragic plane crash that happened last year. There's obviously a lot of reporting about shortage of air traffic controllers, kind of the strain on the government. I mean, does what you're working on address that? And do you think that technology can be applied so that those incidents, or the chance of those incidents, is reduced close to zero, or as close to zero as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, unfortunately, it took a tragedy to start the initiative that is in full motion, which is building a brand new air traffic control system. Mm-hmm. And the government is moving incredibly fast, and they're incredibly serious about modernizing that. In many ways, it should have been done 10, 20 years ago. The technology is ancient. I mean, you really cannot imagine like the technology that facilitates the airspace today. So it does not just require a modernization or a reset. It requires building everything literally brand new. Mm-hmm. And that starts from the physical infrastructure and then software. And software is a very, very important piece here, and often allows us to rethink from first principles, like what do we actually need to build in the physical world? How do you, and I think this is what America has been really good at. If you look at the large technology companies in Silicon Valley, like companies like Amazon and others, they actually turn problems that are in the world of atoms into a problem that can be solved with software. And I think there's a lot of benefit to kind of follow a similar pattern as we kind of rebuild the air traffic control system. So to an incident like the one that you just mentioned, the mid-air crash, if you basically streamline and sequence all of the traffic proactively, you really take stress out of the system. You increase efficiency, but you also take stress out of the tactical separation of the aircraft, and I think that is a direction on how to modernize and think about how air traffic shall flow across the country.
And how is AI changing the way the U.S. sees a battlefield?
Yeah, I think there are two components to it. One is the future fights are going to be won by having a faster decision tempo than the enemy and the adversary. So how can we use AI to really speed up decision making, have a faster OODA loop, planning 3-4 weeks for an operation and then just executing the operation does not work, right? And will no longer work. So how are you much more dynamic in your decision making? So that's one. And then the second part is how do you have better predictability into what the battlefield is going to look like over the next few hours, over the next few days, over the next few weeks. So you kind of like plan and decide against the future state, not react to the present or the past.
And I want to go back to you, Mark, for this question, but I also want to hear from you, Philip. Both of your companies sit at the nexus of tech and security. Do you think there's a risk of the U.S. relying too heavily on advanced technology, AI, in particular, especially just given how quickly things are evolving?
Yeah. We certainly see sort of a huge amount of buzz or interest in the investment community and the government now, both in AI and also for sort of the neoprimes, like companies that are not necessarily the big prime contractors, the Boeings, the Lockheeds, but instead the SpaceXs, the Andurils, Saronics, the Radias. And I think those areas of focus are going to be very productive. Now, the thing that's going to be very important, though, is being able to look at the entire chain from factory to foxhole, like being able to not just look at AI and some of the really sexy things, but also then start to industrialize and build up the factories, build up the capabilities, build up the ability to build more munitions. And then what's missing in the middle is the pipe. Sort of the pipe that moves all that stuff from the factory to where all the high-end decision-making is made. And that's where we're trying to fill in that middle by being able to surge and provide mobility for the massive amount of things that are going to have to be made now in the defense world.
And what do you think, Philip? I mean, is there a danger to relying too much on advanced technology, or is that better than relying too much on humans?
Well, I think as a country, we want the best, period. Right, and the best can sometimes come from a company that's around for 100 years and has a manufacturing capacity and experience, and sometimes it can come from a newly formed company that has unique technology insights and attracts a talent that is needed to build the future. Right. Ultimately, I think it comes down to what works and what doesn't, and I would argue that the bar should be no different if it's a kind of like traditional prime or if it's a new entrant. Everyone needs to deliver, and who doesn't deliver should equally there should equally be the decision be made to, okay, like your stuff doesn't work, we need to rely on do more with a company who deliver on budget, who deliver faster, who would deliver ahead of timelines, because time is really the number one enemy. We don't have time. We need to move fast as a country. We need to move fast decisions, and we need to deliver and get capability to the warfighter at like rapid speed.
And we're, in a moment now where we are both grappling with the continued war in Ukraine. There's this conflict in Iran. What are you learning, Philip, from the current global array of conflicts? What lessons are you taking away from sort of what we're seeing and what we might see down the line? Very cognizant that there's a lot of talk about potential U.S. China conflict over Taiwan at some point. So what are the lessons that you're taking away from to the current atmosphere?
Yeah, again, I think it's both important to view it not just through the government lens, but equally on the commercial sectors, the critical industries that like our lives depend on. What we see is that you've got to be able to very, very quickly reconfigure your operational network, right? We see it in trade, we see it in energy, we see it, frankly speaking, in air travel and transportation. And so how are the institutions that used to have the fortune to plan for 10 years and kind of have this very, very steady pace, how are they set up to be very, very dynamic and react, or like to some extent anticipate what is going to happen so they are even like a step ahead? I think core principles, like even in supply chains, like just in time, like there are certain principles on how the world functioned for the last 20, 30 years that are probably no longer relevant for the next 20 to 30 years. And I think one way is to say, like, we don't want that and fight that, and one is like to actually embrace that and make that an operational advantage. And I think that is important, and technology is absolutely critical for that.
And Mark, how are you? What are you taking away from?
Yeah, if you look at the two primary conflicts today that we're watching every day, two big lessons, I think, and what I learned from these lessons, and I'll share those in a second, is manufacturing and mobility is essential to modern military. And if you look at what's happening in Iran, there's asymmetry, right? In all the wars that we're looking at today, there's huge demonstrations of asymmetry. And so when you have a drone that costs tens of thousands that's being intercepted by an interceptor that costs millions, that takes a year to make versus a month to make, you just can't fight that for a long period of time. And so this is going to push more and more emphasis into the world of manufacturing, rapid mobility. That's going to be so essential in the wars that we fight in the future. And then today, some of you may have read the report that came out of Ukraine. It's like for the first time, a military made entirely of drones and robots overtook some Russian troops in land, and the robots, the machines, pushed them back. So what does that mean in terms of our end-to-end preparation from factory to foxhole? It's like things are becoming more and more important in the world of manufacturing, in the world of mobility, when the tools and the products are actually doing the fighting.
Have you been surprised about the Ukrainians' resilience and also their skill, and also just the inability of the Russians to overrun Ukraine?
Yes and no. I mean, I think everybody was surprised maybe in the beginning, but it's been amazing what's happened. And in the end, there's such an emphasis on technology innovation, and it's just amazing now watching the companies and the expertise starting to come from Ukraine into the next conflicts that are happening with the Iran war. And the United States is starting to learn quite a bit from the conflicts that are happening and starting to retool how we are preparing to fight wars. And so it's just been incredible watching the innovation happening within Ukraine. And innovation ultimately can be one of the best tools or one of the best weapons that you have in conflict, it's shown to me.
And a potential conflict over Taiwan, I mean, how would that differ from the conflicts that we are dealing with, seeing now, and where does technology come in?
Like from our perspective, for something that a potential conflict in the Pacific, it's going to be so important for the United States and our allies to be able to project force over gigantic distances. And so being able to get the type of material that we would need to fight a real war against a real adversary halfway around the world is a huge challenge. And we have to do it in a very unpredictable way. You know, instead of landing at the bases where they would expect us to be landing, we now are in a world where it's pretty predictable and it's pretty easy to hit those bases, we find. And so being able to land and move things to unpredicted landing strips all over the island chains and such is going to be very, very important, I think, as we start to prepare to fight a potential conflict in the Pacific.
What are your thoughts, Philip, on a potential conflict over Taiwan, and what's going to be most important?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some risk to kind of like extrapolate the technology needs from the conflict in Ukraine to the Pacific, two very different theaters. To your point, like the distances are significantly greater. Instead of land, you need to move things over water. So I think there's some risk of like over-indexing a little bit on like the learnings that came out of the Ukraine conflict and potentially investing in the wrong technologies, just because certain weapon systems have proven successful in Ukraine does not mean that they will be very successful in the Pacific theater, right? I think the logistical challenges are going to be fundamentally different in the Pacific theater. The ability to plan ahead, pre-position, have more predictability is significantly more important than it will be, or it is right now in Ukraine. So I think investing in that, and again, we can have also, if we just look at geography from the perspective like where we produce, right? Like how do we not only build the most advanced equipment, but how do we get it where we need it, right? And that's where logistics is such a key piece.
And say this happens in, by 2030, so 4 years, less than 4 years. Can the U.S. actually be ready to fight a war in the Pacific, especially given, the fact that Iran, Ukraine, the weapons, stockpile is being drawn down. Obviously, it takes a lot of time to make these weapons. Can the U.S. actually be ready?
Yeah, I think it's like, how do we deter, right? How do we deter conflict? I think like deterring, I think the strategy to deter is a slightly different strategy to being just ready, right? And the two have to work hand in hand. And I think there are many areas where we have enormous technology advantage over our near peer adversaries, and there are other areas where I think everyone knows we need to catch up and we need to move faster. And I think everyone, both industry and the government, are approaching it with an enormous amount of urgency.
And I want to hear from both of you on this question, but I'll go to you first, Mark. When you think about U.S. China competition, and I mean particularly in the technology space, because obviously that's where a lot of the attention is, AI, advanced tech. How would you assess that competition?
Yeah. It used to be almost a foregone conclusion that innovation was going to be the winning factor and come from the United States. That's not necessarily the case anymore, I think, and especially as you start to think about innovation going all the way back into the manufacturing food chain. China has some real advantages when it comes to manufacturing big things at scale, and so we need to make sure we take that very seriously. And things like AI and things like power generation are so important in today's modern security and energy security worlds, and there are some huge advantages that the Chinese have. So we have to be very aware of that and realize we have some serious competition, I think.
Philip, what do you think?
I mean, software is where I think our advantage is. AI is where the U.S. is significantly ahead, and I think leaning into that. And it's a domain that is moving so fast. So like just relying on our laurels and the advantage that we have there is not going to be enough. And investing in the energy infrastructure that is needed to support that. Yeah. And then I think the part that is, I think that should give us the most optimism. I think the amount of patriotism and energy and dedication that I see in the technology sector and interest, frankly speaking, into this topic and the domain is unmatched and has changed very, very significantly over the last 5-6 years. And I think that is an incredible advantage that we have as a country that we really want to lean into.
Well, thank you both so much. We're out of time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Please welcome Senator Steve Daines and Burgess Everett of Semafor.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Burgess Everett, Congressional Bureau Chief of Semafor. This is Senator Steve Daines, the senior senator from Montana for, 8 more months?
For 8 more months, that's right.
So that'll allow you to give us your most unfettered views of politics and policy.
Daines Unleashed, here we go.
Off the chain. You ran the Senate Republican campaign on 2024. You were successful. You flipped the Senate. I think part of that success was that Republicans were kind of prosecuting the case that Democrats don't kind of feel how Americans feel about the economy, even if the statistics may say that the economy is doing well. Are Republicans in danger of making the same mistake right now, or are things fundamentally different than they were 2 years ago?
Well, what's different versus 2 years ago is we're in the second midterm of a president. So we call it the 6-year itch. You look historically, look at Reagan's second midterm in 1986. You look at Bush's second midterm, 06, Obama's second midterm, 14. You just have a different political dynamic. You always have headwind. Think about Ronald Reagan. In his second midterm, the Republicans lost 8 seats in the U.S. Senate. We might forget about that. Go to 2014, Barack Obama, they lost 9 seats, the Democrats.
That was the last real wave year in the Senate.
It was, and that was the year I got elected. Remember, we picked up 9 seats. I was the first Republican in 100 years to win in Montana for this seat. We show up, we had a 54-46 majority, like thinking the dog caught the car, Barack Obama's still president. Now what's going to happen? And of course, then Scalia tragically passed away, and it changed the course of history, certainly the Supreme Court in the country in many ways, when we blocked Merrick Garland's nomination, and then we moved forward to more of a, call it 6-3, more center-right courts. But when I take a look at the numbers now, I went back, in fact, looked at in Ronald Reagan in 86, if you look at generic ballots, Republicans were down 12 points in the generic ballot in 1986. Mm-hmm. Look at the generic ballot right now, Republicans down about 5 points. So when you litigate an election and you're trying to displace an incumbent, the first thing you have to do is convince the voters we need to fire the incumbent. Mm-hmm. But the second argument is we need to hire the new person. So I think it's not that hard usually in a second midterm to kind of make the argument it's time to get rid of the current guys, men and women. But what's harder for the Democrats right now, I think, is to litigate that they should replace whoever they're going to fire. I think that's the dilemma. The American people, we need to remind them of that, of where the country was just 18 months ago with a wide open border and with policies that were certainly going against more made in America energy and so forth. But it's not lost on us. We've got a problem now with the price of gasoline. I'm hearing that consistently back home. I just did a Stuart Varney this morning on Fox Biz. I did CNBC yesterday with Joe Kernan. And if you look historically, let's take the price of gas for a moment, is back in June of 22, following the invasion of Ukraine by the Russians, the national gas price got to $5 in June of 22. And then it dropped precipitously. By the fall, it was back down in the $2-3 range. Scott Bessent here this morning just said he predicts gas prices will fall to $3 or lower, and I think that's exactly right, because we're at $4 versus $5 in June of 22. And if you just look at what probably will happen here, look at Brent and WTI right now. They're back down in the low 90s. I think you're going to see a pretty significant reduction in oil prices and corresponding gas prices, probably about the time when voters will be most engaged in the next election. I think it's going to be very important for Republicans to have a better cycle.
Well, Senator Langford was up here a few minutes ago, and we were talking to him about this, and he said people may recognize the tax cuts, but there's a little bit of a "what have you done for me" lately vibe among the electorate. How do you counteract that?
I think we've done a very poor job in selling what was in that bill. Usually in Washington, D.C., when you have a big bill, the more you dig into it, the worse it is. Mm-hmm. This is an exception to that. The more you dig into it, the better it is across the broad spectrum in terms of socioeconomically. And we just have not done a good job litigating that. At the end of the day, it's about pocketbook issues. And so often, I remember in the days when I was in the software business, I was a Procter & Gamble guy for 13 years, and I was in the software business for 12. We took a company public, and we sold to Oracle. We spent a lot of time, though, having to sell. When you're selling to the C-suite, you don't sell features, you sell benefits. CEOs don't understand necessarily all the technical features. They understand what's the benefit, the return on investment.
Right.
We tend, as Republicans, to get into data, and so this sometimes irrelevant to the electorate. You got to get right back to pocketbook issues. Dollars in my pocket. 90% of senior citizens are not going to pay tax on their Social Security. That's a huge win, and senior citizens are the highest propensity voters in a midterm election. We've not done a good job. If you go talk to senior citizens right now across the country, I venture to say very few understand right now that 90% of them are not paying taxes on the Social Security benefits.
Is there a degree of empathy to it too? Like, we feel you, we hear your concerns, because I feel like sometimes the Trump administration may not do that to the degree that maybe voters would want to hear.
Well, let's bring it back home to, I mean, clearly midterm elections are referendums often on the administration that's in charge.
Yeah.
So I'm not sugarcoating that. But if you take it back down to the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, candidate quality matters. When I ran the NRSC, I always said the most important day in an election cycle is filing day. It's more important than election day.
Yeah.
Who is in the race? And we worked hard to get the best candidates electable. Think Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania. When I recruited Dave to run, and of course, he just came off a really tough primary against Dr. Oz, lost by less than 1,000 votes. It's a brutal experience. You take it very personally. I remember calling Dave and talking to Dina, and I said, here's what I'm going to commit to you all. We're going to clear this primary. You're the only person that can win Pennsylvania, a high-quality candidate, and the rest is history. You won by 15,000 votes. So similarly across these other races, we won. Candidate quality matters, and that's why I think we break it down. By the time we get to September and October, I think in many of our races, we're going to have very high-quality Republican candidates. And usually Republicans are the ones who shoot ourselves in the foot with the crazy train in primaries and so forth. We have a little bit of that right now, too. But I think generally we've got better candidates in the races that are going to decide the future of the United States Senate than the Democrats do.
You're talking crazy train, you're talking about in Texas? Is that?
It's a possibility.
Yeah. Have you talked to the president recently about that race?
Well, I just think that having worked very close to the president in the last cycle as the chairman of the NRC, we were talking weekly. We're talking all the time. I remember I flew down to Mar-a-Lago when I first became chairman. It's an elected leadership position. My Senate colleagues said, Steve, we do that. This is an important cycle. And I'm a Montana guy at heart. I don't like to leave my state if I don't have to, but you travel across 30 to 40 states when you're NRC chairman, which I did. But the first thing is I flew down to Mar-a-Lago. I met with President Trump and Susie Wiles. There is upstairs office. I said, Mr. President, the most important thing we can do when you are elected president in November 24, now think about this, this is January of 23. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of water running the bridge between that point and the election. I said, you're going to win in November 24, is you've got to have a Republican majority, because if you don't, your first phone call to get your cabinet through is to Chuck Schumer, and good luck with that. And so we worked together very closely, because the Senate, of course, is in the HR business. The House is in the PR business. We're in the HR business. We confirm all the nominees. And that's why the president was laser focused as we were together to make sure we got the Republican majority for him. But that was delivered by having really good candidates in the races that really mattered. And I think generally that's true right now. But I think in Texas, John Cornyn's the guy. We need John Cornyn to win that primary.
Do you need the president to endorse John Cornyn to win that primary?
I think the best case scenario right now is for the president to stay neutral. If you remember the Missouri Senate race, Eric Schmidt, Eric Greitens, remember the president says, I endorse Eric.
Right.
I think we want to just keep him neutral on that race. And just speaking with John Cornyn yesterday, he's a great friend of mine. That race is just too close to call. I think I'd be surprised if the president will weigh in on that race. And staying neutral, frankly, would be a good thing at the moment.
What about the House? Are you thinking that is a lost cause at this point? Or you
I was a House guy for 2 years, so I'm not an expert on the House.
Longer in the Senate.
Yeah, we call the House the truck stop and the Senate the country club. But on the House,
it's like your second bit of shade at the House.
Yeah, well, they've been throwing a fair amount of shade our way lately.
Okay,
so we kind
yeah,
of tossed it back across the line there. I mean, it's tighter margins. And one thing about the House, it's not about 435 seats. It's going to be about 10 to 15 seats.
Sure.
And how the numbers fall there. But Speaker Johnson, who I think is a terrific. I love Speaker Johnson. He's got really tight margins there. So I mean, the House is a steeper climb for Republicans certainly than the Senate is.
Last time I talked to you 3 or 4 weeks ago about your decision to not run again, and you kind of brought up the question of your own future. You didn't have any concrete plans, but you didn't rule out running for governor of Montana maybe in 2028. What do you think? Are you still thinking about that? Where do you stand on that question?
I get a fair amount of encouragement on that, but I Probably not.
Probably not.
Probably not. No, we have 7 grandkids now. We went from 0 to 7 grandkids in the last 6 years. For those of you who have grandchildren, you understand. Cindy and I have been married 39 years, and a little more time with Cindy, a little more time with grandkids. But as I've said, I'm not retiring. I'm going to repurpose.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm. I love working the federal policy set, truly, more so than the state set. I was talking that with John Thune when I broke the news to him that I was not going to run again. And John and I were talking about when he was thinking of running for governor once upon a time in South Dakota. And he says, you open up the newspaper, and he says, Steve, my eyes were drawn more to the federal issues more so than the state issues. And I think Montana's going to be, we're in good shape. We have balanced budgets, taxes are coming down, pro-business kind of climate, beautiful state. We strike that balance, as I always said, between we're a blend of Merle Haggard and John Denver. It's that melody, I chair the National Parks subcommittee, which I love to do. We're active fly fishing and backpacking, hunting, and so forth. We love our way of life in Montana. But we'll be okay in Montana. I worry more about what's happening right now in this city in terms of policy outcomes and the geopolitical stage.
Is there anything that could change your mind about that?
I probably not.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not. I mean, our current governor's, who was my business partner in the software business, we worked together. He's hired me to serve on his exec team for 12 years. We took a company public, and then we sold to Oracle, and neither one of us ever thought we'd be in politics. I mean, that was truly, we were there to create jobs and enjoy building businesses, and next thing you know, he's the governor, I'm a senator, so here we are.
China, the president is going to probably re-engage on talks on this soon. Mm-hmm. Are you still planning? You had been planning to go there this spring, and then it kind of got delayed, it sounded like.
Well,
what's going on
so
there
it'll
now?
It'll be my, I think, it'll be 7th or 8th Senate.
And for those that don't know, you worked in China for many years.
I did, yeah. When I worked for P&G, I was 7 years stateside, and then they got tapped on the shoulder to go to China, to Guangzhou, where we lived for, it was supposed to be a 2-year expat assignment, then it was 2 more, and then 2 more, so it was 6 years. We went from a standing start to nearly $1 billion in business in 6 years. It was some of the toughest 6 years, but most rewarding 6 years of my professional career. We had 2 kids born in Hong Kong. We were there, so we had a real full and rich experience. So I've always want to remain engaged in China. I believe in a couple principles. Number one, we cannot decouple. We cannot decouple from China. Where 42% of the world's GDP is between the United States and China, but we must need to think about de-risking. That's something Scott Besson said. I agree with that. I was at the China Forum a year ago, the only member of Congress that went over there. Most will not go over there because politically it's risky. We've got to engage. And I'll tell you one reason to engage for this audience. If you look at the revenues of the S&P 500, U.S. companies doing business in China, it's $1.2 trillion last year. That is 6 times the trade deficit. So we myopically focus on the trade deficit, and I'm not suggesting we shouldn't keep an eye on the trade deficit, but it dropped from $300 billion to $200 billion last year. But the top line revenue to the S&P 500 is $1.2 trillion. We run a massive revenue surplus with Chinese, think of American companies, and I think we always want to keep that in balance. It's very important to drive top line revenues so we continue to prosper and thrive in China. It's getting more difficult as increasingly the Chinese companies are getting favor from their as the home crowd there. But I'll be going over there, taking a bipartisan group of senators. We'll be in Shanghai, we'll be in Beijing, and the most important thing I want to deliver to these senators is understand the innovation ecosystem that's going on in China. The supply chain discussion is a 1990s, that's a Brady Bunch discussion, Brady Bunch reruns. Supply chain's important, but the most important thing in China is the world-class innovation ecosystem they're building out at the moment. And just putting them on a high-speed train from Shanghai to Beijing will say a lot.
Okay, Senator James, thanks so much for
All right,
talking to us.
Thank you, you bet.
Appreciate your time. Thanks.
Please welcome Senator Todd Young, joined by Burgess Everett of Semafor.
I won't introduce myself again, but welcome to Senator Young.
Oh, it's great to be with you.
And
thanks to Semafor for putting together this event. Really great.
Sure, and so one interesting thing about you is you're a former D1 soccer player for Navy. Do you ever get senators in a pickup game, or are they not limber enough to do that?
You know, there's an annual charity event, I think as everyone knows, for baseball, and there's a similar event for soccer now too, and it's kind of becoming a big deal. We raise money for inner city kids so that they can enjoy youth soccer, and there's also an embassy tournament, and they're starting to take that very seriously. So, yeah.
You going to go to any World Cup games?
I am. Yes, I'm definitely going to the first U.S. game.
Okay.
It'll be in Los Angeles and Paraguay, if I remember.
It's a big moment for our country, isn't it?
It's a really big moment. We'll be on the world stage. We do events historically very well in this country, and our soccer expertise will be in full display. Just years ago, in the wake of the 1994 World Cup, which I also attended at Chicago Soldier Field, and we were 14th in the world, 12th in the world, so we got pretty, we became respected in international soccer, and then we took a couple of steps back in some ways, and it's time to prove our mettle now, so I'm excited.
My 6-year-old wears a Pulisic jersey around the house.
So. Oh, is that right?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Right.
He's fantastic.
You're also a veteran, and I think someone who's been skeptical of some foreign intervention. What do you think about the war in Iran right now? I haven't heard too much of your feelings about this lately. I'm wondering what you think. Has this been a success? Is it time to wrap it up? What do you think?
It's time to wrap it up as quickly as we can. It's time to accomplish the mission. I mean, we're at war. I'll call it what it is, I think. Mm-hmm. And it's important that we win it. And I would personally define win it, though the definition of success has been a bit amorphous, as sometimes happens in wartime. I would define success as figuring out how to secure or extract the uranium in Iran. That's essential. And reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Those two things have to happen if we can claim success coming out of this.
Do we have to put folks on the ground to do those things, do you think?
It's unclear.
Okay.
It's unclear. And this is where the president and his team need to formulate that plan and then articulate the plan and associated trade-offs and potentially sacrifices that will be associated with that plan. And that's why I keep emphasizing, in much of my public commentary, and historically I've emphasized, the importance of just sharing with the American people what is going to be involved by the best of our lights as we march forward. The worst thing we can do is go to war without trying to unify a segment of the American people. We're in this war, though, and we're going to be approaching a point here at the end of this month where we hit that 60-day threshold, which is an important day because that's in the War Powers Act, and the War Powers Act indicates that at that point Congress is either going to have to authorize future force or the president has a 30-day extension, but either way...
For withdrawal, though, correct?
Yes.
Or technically.
So either way, we're having to start to think very seriously as an institution about an authorization. I'd prefer not to wait until the very end to get clarity as to what comes next. I think this will be an opportunity for us to articulate any concerns with the plan and trade-offs and associated things, and then I'm willing to work with the administration if an AUMF is necessary to draft one that they're comfortable with.
Is that happening at all yet, or is that not happening right now? The work on a potential AUMF?
Right now, it's a partisan political exercise, unfortunately.
Because you've been voting against these Democratic
I have, and the theory is, the reason I have been, though I think it's important that we authorize conflicts. I haven't wavered with respect to that. I popped my head up in the context of Venezuela.
Yeah.
And
earning you some very nice tweets.
The president torched me on social media. I don't regret doing it. And then ultimately, I said, okay, I'll go along with the team. I'll vote no on this, knowing that we didn't have the votes anyway, candidly.
Because he would have vetoed this.
He would have vetoed it. So we were able to extract a public hearing from the Secretary of State before the War Powers Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee. And whatever commitment I could get from the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor and archivist, I should add, that
he wears many hats.
Exactly. That if we're going to send U.S. Marines into Venezuela, that would require congressional authorization. And he at least would consult with us beforehand. So I got what I felt I could have out of this situation. We got involved in the Iran situation a little differently, right?
Yeah.
There was no real knowledge from rank and file members.
And there wasn't that buildup you saw in Venezuela where there was, the missiles on the drug boats.
So it puts us candidly in an awkward situation. And what I've said is number one, I will support the president because I want him to be successful, especially as it relates to those two objectives. But number two, I'm not going to forswear my responsibilities as it relates to future authorizations and making sure we have a fact-based discussion about trade-offs and all the rest. And that makes, I think, some of my colleagues uncomfortable that I'm forcing hard questions, but that's necessary.
But you don't sound like someone who would just vote against authorizing the war. You sound like if it came to it, you would want to be a productive participant in writing a war authorization.
Yeah, but we owe our troops, we owe the American people a solid plan.
Yeah.
And our job is to stress test plans. You know, I think had we held hearings on the front end of this and been given some notice and opportunity to hold hearings, we might have improved the thinking around certain issues. Maybe the Strait of Hormuz, for example. But that's neither here nor there.
You mentioned hearings. They're really, I mean, I know that the Defense Secretary has been giving media briefings. Rubio has been talking to the media as well. But is there a place, like, should the Senate be having like open hearings about what's going on now, or has that ship sailed to you?
Well, this is always the issue, regardless of administration, right?
Yeah.
I was very much chagrined during the Biden administration that we didn't have open hearings as it relates to the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. An absolute disaster. Still to this day, I don't see that anyone was really held accountable for the sloppy decision making. And we haven't elicited the sort of facts or really even asked the sort of probing questions that a public hearing would lend itself to. As importantly, we haven't engaged in the pedagogical exercise of public questioning so that the American people know we're asking hard questions, gives them confidence in our system. And so even if the questions are avoided, I do think it's important to have that exercise. And, you know, there are a lot of red herrings that float around this town, like we can't be giving away our war plans to the other side. Of course we cannot. Right. That's where you don't get into that level of specificity in a public hearing.
There's a way to have public hearings without giving away our strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
And what about funding? Like, I've been talking to some Democrats this week about funding the war, and their concern is that basically the administration asks Congress for lots of money and never authorizes the war, but the funding is enough to keep the war going. Do you have questions about a war supplemental at this point? Do you think that one needs to be passed?
And if you speak to anyone that says they have no questions about a massive infusion of additional monies into DOD at a time when we've already, through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act or Working Families Tax Cut Act, infused a lot of money into DOD, then I feel like we're not doing our job. So those questions are being answered.
Okay.
I think Chairman Wicker in particular is really doing a good job diving into the details of the request. I think much of the money will go to magazine depth, that is replenishing the depleted stores of munitions that we've had to use in order to carry out our key objectives vis-a-vis Iran, and I would support that. I mean, whatever money it takes to replenish those stores of weapons, we need them. Yeah. We need them. So the American people would support this as well. But we're going to have to scrutinize large round numbers, as we always do. And then there's another legal dimension to this, which is historically the Office of Legal Counsel, which offers counsel to the president as it relates to war powers matters, has construed a vote for a supplemental package as an authorization for the use of military force. So,
which I think is why Democrats say we can't vote for that if that's how this is perceived.
Yeah, so I think there will be some of our members who will insist on, prior to any sort of vote for a supplemental, resolving this issue around future plans and maybe even a formal authorization.
You said just a few minutes ago, it shouldn't be a surprise to folks because I think you've talked to the president several times at least since he joined office. You said you want him to succeed.
We should all want the president to succeed.
You didn't endorse him in 2024. How is your relationship with the president at this point?
You know, it's really positive. The president, I think, has a certain respect, maybe sometimes a grudging respect, but a certain respect for people who don't bend the knee consistently, who articulate uncomfortable truths because there aren't many around him. And I think people underestimate how the president respects that. Moreover, we have candid and very comfortable conversations. Mm-hmm. He called me a few weeks ago, asked me to go to a social gathering. I was on a CODEL. We had a great conversation. We're working incredibly constructively together on a shipbuilding exercise, and I'm very excited about that. We make almost no ships, merchant commercial vessels in this country, and so the president's very excited to start shipbuilding again, so he's great at extracting leverage. He follows the incentives of the office, which is if you're able to use leverage on members of Congress, most chief executives would use it in order to drive forward their policies. And I'm not uncomfortable with the dynamic.
Okay.
I do perceive very strongly that many of my colleagues are, and so it is what it is.
But your state has an interesting Republican Party, right? Like the president was unable to get his redistricting through Indiana.
Yes.
I mean, what is it that makes an Indiana Republican different, would you say?
Well, some of us are different, and what is it that makes us different? You know, I don't know. Maybe it's a critical distance from the nation's capital and the cosmopolitan coasts that helps cushion us against...
I'm very cosmopolitan.
Yeah, exactly. It was a dig against you personally,
that's
right?
How I took it.
We all know that. All right. Yeah. Listen, we've had some great leaders over the years, some really good models in the governor's office, in the state legislature, in C-suites and nonprofit organizations, and I think that's been important, and so they deserve a lot of credit modeling what real leadership looks like, and sometimes it means doing things that are in the near term unpopular or uncomfortable, but earning people's trust over a period of time that you're trying to do the right thing.
Okay. Senator Young, that's all the time we have. Thanks so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us.
Please welcome Calvin Butler of Exelon, Vimal Kappa of Honeywell, and Liz Clayman of Fox Business Network.
Hi, everybody. thank you for coming to this. We have major drama in the energy security world right now, and I think you are going to be riveted by this conversation because there is a lot of breaking news. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here. And believe it or not, I want to start with breaking news other than the war. Is it okay if we bring up the war? There's a lot of news there when it comes to energy, but I got to tell you guys something that broke yesterday, and it involves the Texas grid operator, which came out yesterday and said that demand, and it wasn't just saying, warning, that energy demand for power will quadruple from current demand, will quadruple by 2032, so just 6 years from now, due to booming data center expansion and population growth. This is an increase that would require the brand new creation of 300 nuclear power plants. So I want to begin with that. And Calvin, I'll start with you because you as the CEO, he's like, thanks, no thanks. You as the CEO of the largest regulated United States utility, how are you absorbing that information? What's your gut reaction when you hear that it will quadruple and we're not ready for that?
First off, thank you. And it's consistent with what we've known. And we see it in our own jurisdictions, and it requires a significant investment in infrastructure upgrades, because what you don't want to hear is that the infrastructure is not ready to deliver that power to the businesses and homeowners out there. So let me just give you an example. In one of our jurisdictions, Illinois, ComEd, we run ComEd, it's the 4th largest utility in the United States. We know for a fact we're going to increase load in Illinois by 19 gigawatts by 2030. Put that in perspective. ComEd, the 4th largest utility in the state, its peak load ever for a year has been 23 gigawatts. So you see the expansion that's required and the investment that's required. But it has to be consistent because you can't run and catch up. Even if half of that load materializes, it's still more growth than we've ever seen in our industry over a period of years.
Vimal, 60% of that increase just in Texas alone is going to come from the AI data center build-out. That causes all kinds of questions about regular customers, and how is Honeywell looking at that, capitalizing on it, and hopefully mitigating it in some way, shape, or form so we don't have a riot, from people who say, wait a minute, why is my bill going up, and dealing with that. And you are in 70 different countries. I would imagine this isn't just exclusive to the United States.
Yeah, so it's a challenging question very clearly on, a utility industry was flat for many years and now it wants to grow at a rate we can all debate, but it's very high. And fundamentally, how to do that without increasing the cost to consumer is a puzzle to be solved. Who is going to absorb the differential cost? Because cost to build is increasing because of the inflationary impact on materials and labor, the time required for permitting. So that's a fact that it certainly is, taking more time. The opportunity for us is to think more constructively, to think not only on creating more capacity, but also managing more demand. And there's an opportunity to think about creating more microgrids so that the peak time consumption can be absorbed so that we don't have to create massive capacity simultaneously. So if you have to create 100, the one thing which is not well-known fact is any capacity which we talked about, it's at the peak. Peak occurs for 3 to 4 hours only in a day. So balance 20 hours, you don't need it. So if you could manage those 4 hours well, then your net demand required is relatively lesser. It's not going to change the scale of upside we need. That clearly is the case. But instead of 100, you probably will need 60 or 70, which reduces the problem and make affordability a likely an outcome, because affordability issue also has to be solved. So we need to build more, we need to build it efficiently, and we need to keep the power affordable for all the consumers.
Calvin, how do you convince businesses and regular customers to be flexible with the grid? Aren't you working on that right now?
We are, and I agree with Vimal, but I would say it's an and. It's an and, the baseload generation and the peak demand piece in there. And the challenge that we have is we're operating from a policy standpoint that was built, that was really formed for flat or negative declining load growth. And our policy considerations aren't moving with the changing dynamics.
That's right.
And everybody wants all these things built, but they want to get it done for free. And we have to come together and say, I think there's a need to have baseload generation, which I think utilities should be part of that. But at the same time, utilizing technology to drive efficiencies and drive really dynamics in this power market all the way around.
You have business leaders here who are saying, what are these guys talking about? I operate from 9 to 5 or 8 to 10 p.m. I need the lights on. I need to use it during so-called peak hours.
Yep.
So what do you say to that?
I think what Calvin is saying, the end solution is you need more generation, you need more base capacity, and you want to manage peak by storing in a battery system so that a large grocery store or a large hospital can drop off from the grid for those couple of hours, and you don't overload the grid for those few hours. It's an and solution. You need to generate more, but also need to consume less by storing. And that solution requires regulatory changes because our regulations are not really geared up to adjust to this. But it's this problem, I'm sure that every problem can be solved if there's a consensus. What are we solving for?
But you have to have a sense of urgency about solving it. Because what we have seen within the PJM marketplace, which is the largest grid operator in the United States, we have seen hours before people have had to been scaled down and power coming off because supply wasn't coming on the market. So this is an issue that's in front of us right now, and we have to do it with a sense of urgency.
Whether it's your businesses, I need a show of hands, or your home bill, how many have seen it go up, let's say, in the last year?
Oh,
okay.
That's a lot of hands.
I have too, and I'm in New Jersey.
I think that was
I'm not supposed to admit. My mother says, just say you're from the tri-state area, darling.
But it's supply and demand. You know, going to your opening comment about the surge of demand, it's supply and demand. We have inadequate supply to meet this rising demand. And until we address that issue, all of our bills are going to continue to go up, and that's the piece we have to go after.
Shall we go to the war? Now we need to dovetail to that, because I will tell you that power grids are the new target. All you have to do is look at what's been going on in Russia, in Ukraine, and of course Iran. And what do you see? You see that power grids are the soft underbelly of hard power. Vimal, you have customers and clients all over the world. How serious is this, and what do you do? Because you know, unfortunately, there will be future wars.
Yep, so I think the bad actors have really figured out that industrial infrastructure is a very lucrative target for them, because you can go to a large public company and turn down their a power generation plant or a transmission distribution facility, and now all of a sudden they have to pay a ransom fee to you to get out of it. So fundamentally, we have to harden the infrastructure which generates it. There are capabilities which are available, but deployment is in early stage. So it increases the cost to do business, because now you have to put extra measures to strengthen the backbone of industrial system from cyber attacks. But the technology is it's very available, it's very robust. There's no cyber technology which makes you 100% foolproof, but you are raising the defenses to the point that your probability is reducing really to the, we have seen attacks on pipelines. We've seen it historically on some of the power generating units in US and other places. And I think something which has to be done, it's just one more and to the thing. We have to generate more, we need to be smarter on managing peak demand, we have to manage our cybersecurity infrastructure more critically. And it's a problem which has to be solved, concurrently.
Calvin, bad actors don't need missiles, although that's what we have seen certainly with Russia and Ukraine, where they're hitting Zaporizhia, which is the nuclear power plant, et cetera, in Ukraine. But the ransomware, the malware, what at Exelon have you done to put Teflon around these? And again, Exelon is sort of the DoorDash of utilities. They deliver. They're not sitting there making the hamburgers in the back, or but.
So don't blame me for the cost of food. All right. So there you go.
Go to the other guys.
It's nothing new, because we've had 24/7 cyber operations, 365 for years. And Exelon, because of our size and scale, we can invest in that type of security. But to Mal's point, it doesn't protect us. We have a defense in depth process where we're always checking because they're coming every day, all day of the year. They're coming to try to penetrate the system.
You can see them tapping on the
systems.
systems.
We do, all the time. And we work closely with our local and federal security forces to monitor. We share information across our industry because we know how vulnerable and what they want to do. Think about it. The quickest way to create chaos in any society is to hit the power grid. Right. So what are we doing every day to protect it? And we know that, and you see it. In any war that breaks out, they go after the electric grid system. That's what they do because they know the chaos. And we're spending billions a year to protect it. Those are the things that you never see. And you never think about it until something goes wrong. And that's our investment.
And you got to pay for that. Vimal, Honeywell is doing a lot of work in physical AI. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, you should explain what that is. And it, of course, takes the data center, energy to come from it. Yep. Those data centers aren't exactly secured like a lot of the other grid stuff is. But explain physical AI and why it's such a demand on the system and what Honeywell's doing to mitigate that.
So the physical AI, the way to think about it is the AI which we all talk about today is all about using it for better images, better pictures. I can write my resume better. That's one part of AI, which is clearly adds value into our personal lives. Physical AI actually is to solve a problem. And the problem is that industrial system doesn't have skilled workers. If a power plant doesn't have enough operators, enough technicians, they do not have enough people to fix the substation, then the system will come down. So how to solve the issue? Because skilled people are becoming lesser and less available. What physical AI is that you use the capability of the underlying system we have to build the tools so that some portion of work can be automated, which is very repeatable, so call that agentic system. There'll be 20%, maybe 30%, but large part will be to give tools to the people to do their job better. It means I can use a lower skilled person to do a job of a higher skilled person. So I can give you a Google map to drive in DC, even though you don't know the DC roads, because I've given you an agent, but you're a good driver. So similarly, if it's a good technician with 5-year experience, I can give them more tools using the power of data so that they don't make mistakes. They feel confident on making their decisions. And that's the power of AI, which is going to supplement industrial world to reduce the skill gap. So we are solving a known problem. We are not trying to create AI to find a problem to solve.
Got it.
And that's an opportunity set for us, which we are excited
leave that
about.
to Silicon Valley. You guys mentioned policy, and there's very little policy that congeals and comes to reality here in Washington, D.C. Do you think it is necessary to have a global energy policy and get many countries, of course, some of them are not exactly on board, whether it's China, Russia, et cetera, but do you think we need that?
I would be excited about a national energy policy instead of
that alone.
And I think there's a need for the national policy to set guidelines. I do respect the boundaries between the federal and the state jurisdictions, but to have a framework, because there's some basic things we need to do. We need permitting reform. We need to build supply. We need to protect, around data center and AI, we need energy security, and that's where national policy can really play in.
And what would that look like? If you had your dream, if you had the president and Chris Wright's ear, what was the number one thing you'd say?
The number one thing we could do.
This has got to be in there.
The number one thing we could do right now is permitting reform. It takes too long to build something. We can't say we're going to tackle this challenge and it takes us 4 to 5 years to get a permit to build something.
Isn't this administration, though, cutting a lot of that red tape?
They are. They're trying. But this is something that has to be done in Congress.
But also municipalities will say NIMBY.
That's it, and that's the push. But if we start at the federal government level with permitting reform, we think we can get legislation done. That will set the stage to move these things forward.
Vimal?
So I absolutely agree that the national policy is far more critical. One area where not enough work has happened is, and not enough talked about, that how do you use new sources of energy to supplement this energy challenge? So there's a little discussion about SMR and nuclear. Everybody's skeptical in terms of its scaling, whether it'll come quickly enough. There's less discussion about adoption of biofuels, which is also a means of energy which doesn't need crude oil or such fossil fuel.
This administration is not friendly to that.
So to me, it's an energy scarcity issue. And if you really think about a global policy, that's where the global policy...
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Constellation Energy Group's Joe Dominguez was in this chair 2 days ago. Of course, that Exelon was spun off CEG, but he said exactly that.
Yeah. We need an all-of-the-above approach.
Absolutely.
We need every electron and every molecule to address the issues that we're having and also to tackle the affordability.
So you guys would say, do you do wind power business at all?
We don't do wind power business, but we will control those plants. But the point which Kelvin is making is spot on. I think the dialogue has to be, the word for its growth for the next 50 years needs more energy. Because not only the power of AI, which is coming in, which consumes more energy, but as the developing countries grow, they need more energy. The only solution is all form of energy needs to be grown. The traditional oil and gas, how the utilities produce more power, how to bring nuclear into the mix, how to bring biofuel into the mix. Mm-hmm. Everything has a place to play. If we become more philosophical, this is bad, this is good, you lose a window of opportunity to scale something.
Let's end on this. Okay. This audience would like, I would imagine, to know what is the number one thing they and their businesses can do to bring down the cost, but hopefully keep the system secure.
I would say two things, please. One, focus in on energy efficiency because the cheapest kilowatt is one that's never used. That's one. Two, also look to employ or deploy technology onto your system to maximize what you're already using. There is some latent capacity within the system. We need to tap into that.
Yeah, I'm going to second to what Kelvin said, but I'll also add to say the broader society has to understand the complexity of energy system. Our lives are dependent on that.
Yes.
How much it becomes a news when Strait of Hormuz is blocked. Then we realize that how dependent we are. Yeah. So understanding the complexity of the system and choices we have so that our political leadership is in unison with the options versus we take a back seat and hope things will work out. Energy impacts our life every day. We need to understand the options so that we are more demanding that we get the best solution.
And in the end, there's always the candle.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. It is so wonderful to have you both. Thank you very much. And thank you to you and, of course, Semafor for bringing this very vibrant discussion together.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Namir Siddiqui of XRG and Mirabella Brokat El Baze of Semafor.
Good morning, Namir.
Good morning.
Thanks for making the long trip over.
Thank you for having me.
So, Namir, you just recently joined XRG as Chief Investment Officer, and XRG itself is a relatively new organization. We were actually talking backstage just about how young it is. And so I'd love to just start by hearing a bit about kind of your view on the mission for XRG and the genesis of XRG. What is XRG building and kind of why are major global players already choosing to partner with you?
So XRG is a very new entity. We formally started in January of 2025, so about 15 months ago. But we are owned 100% by ADNOC, which is the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. the national oil company of the United Arab Emirates. And that parent of ours has a history which is over 5 decades of partnering with the best-in-class players, whether they're Americans, Europeans, or Asians. And that partnership model is in our DNA. So when we think about investing outside of the borders of the United Arab Emirates in the energy and chemicals value chain, the first thing we seek are partners, and partners who are world-class and who will be with us through the cycles. And it's very important to understand investing in energy because it's a very volatile sector, as you all are experiencing in the last 7 weeks. That's, I wouldn't say par for the course, because this is pretty unique, but in general, the energy and the chemicals business is a very cyclical business. So what you need to have is a lot of resilience and a very long duration, because if you try to time the market in energy or chems, you're probably not going to end up on the right side, given how challenging it is and uncertain it is. So having resilience and having a mindset which goes over decades is extremely important, and that's what XRG is focused on. When we look at the value chain, we want to participate in each and every vertical element of the broader gas value chain. And that means looking for reserves in the ground, looking for infrastructure that takes those reserves from the reservoirs up and across the system, processes those reserves from gas to liquefied natural gas, from gas to power, then the power, or from gas to chemicals. And anywhere in the world, from Australia all the way to Alaska, to Argentina, Mozambique, Germany, Austria, and every other geography in between. So that's our remit. And we're very focused on developing and growing this responsibly and with the right partners.
Well, there's already tremendous momentum behind XRG and tremendous growth behind XRG. Obviously, as you just mentioned, we all know, and it's been a topic across the week, the global energy market has been so disrupted by the conflict in the Middle East and around the Strait of Hormuz. What can you tell me about how these dynamics have really impacted XRG's investment strategy and outlook as you look ahead?
I talked about the volatility, and this period of uncertainty in the Strait of Hormuz is absolutely impacting the world, not just the UAE. And we are all for the strait to be opened up as soon as possible and be open to each and every country in the world. Having said that, this volatility doesn't change the way we think about investing. We look at normalized commodity prices, normalized circumstances when we make investment decisions, rather than what the value or the cost of gas is 1 month out, 3 months out. We're thinking about where is gas headed, where are chemicals headed, where are energy systems headed for the next 10, 20, 30 years out. So yes, the volatility impacts us on a daily inconvenience basis, and it's actually not good for the world from a peace and quality of life perspective. But from an investing point of view, we're not a hedge fund. And that's one thing that's kind of unique for XRG. We are not a private equity firm. We're not a national oil company. We take the best of both and try to bring it together, which is 50 plus years of operating experience across the energy value chain, exploration, production, midstream chemicals, power. We take all that, and then we bring the discipline that the world's best private equity shops have, investors have, and we combine it together for a long duration, resilient business model for investing with partners, with the right partners, and that's what we're doing.
Well, you mentioned Mozambique, Argentina. You also mentioned Alaska. North America and the U.S. has been a core focus already for XRG. Can you tell me a bit about just the opportunity that North America kind of represents for you as you look ahead?
No, thank you. The United States is an extremely important geographic area of focus for us. Extremely important. We would say the most important. And the reason is it's a unique place, and vast resources of natural gas, some of the largest in the world, and very large demand centers as well. So it's actually one of those unique markets where you have the supply of the resource and you have the demand for the resource. So in addition to the demand for the resource, whether it's through the reindustrialization of America, the power needs for AI, which is driving technological, I would say explosive growth here, and hopefully in the rest of the world, but also in chemicals and in industrial uses. So you have that demand that's built in this geography, so it's very important to capture it. But we also use the supply to liquefy it and then send it to other parts of the world that could benefit from the same resource and fuel. We have a stake in Rio Grande LNG at the very southern tip of Texas, on the Texas-Mexico border in Brownsville. And that's going to be one of the largest LNG facilities in America. And that's just one point on the LNG chain that we are in, but we want to expand that. We don't want to be in the U.S. with just one facility. We want to have many more. We have chemical sites. We have in 11 states, we have 17 sites through our chemicals enterprise, which is Covestro, which is Borouge International, also used to be Borealis and Nova. We've combined those. So we've got a very big footprint, but not big enough for our ambitions. And when we look at our global portfolio weighting, we need to invest a lot more in the U.S., especially in the gas value chain. And we're looking at deals. We look at minority stakes. We look at joint ventures. We look at full control transactions. And we really hope that in the course of the next few quarters, we are able to deliver on those.
Well, resilience has come up a few times just in this conversation, but again, across the week, yesterday we had a whole track just focused on what it takes to build resilience. And so I'm curious, when you think about the value chain, how is XRG actually thinking about what it takes to build that resilience?
So to be resilient in an energy system, what you have to first of all make sure is you're diversified. And you're diversified globally, you're diversified in terms of, are you in upstream, are you in midstream, and ultimately in the short, so in trading parlance, it's longs and shorts. You just don't want to be long the resource. You also want to have the right shorts to place that resource. And we're trying to do that. We're very focused on the midstream infrastructure. We've invested in the Southern Gas Corridor that takes gas from the Caspian region, Azerbaijan, and then all the way across Turkey into Europe. We're doing the same. Instead of a pipeline, we're looking at LNG ships that will take Argentine and U.S. LNG across the world, whether it's to Asia, to Africa, to Europe. So when we talk about resilience, we want to be diversified globally. You want to be in the entire value chain. And most importantly, you want to be in the right assets. You want to be in the assets that are in the advantage part of the cost curve. The most economic, the best assets, the biggest and scalable resources that we can have. And that's our ambition. That's how we plan to tackle resilience. And I will say this, the UAE has blown me away. I've only been there for 3.5 months, and I saw the response given the dynamic of the last 6-7 weeks. If there is a country which will be resilient, it's the United Arab Emirates, and it's spectacular what they've done. So,
well, what a note to end on, and thank you so much for being with us today. Fantastic insight shared. So, thank you.
Please welcome Lee Zeldin of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and Ilana Shaw of Semafor.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Mr. Administrator.
It's great to be here.
Welcome to Semafor World Economy. It's rare that I do this, but I'm pleased to announce we'll make a little news here, because I understand later this afternoon you're going to be announcing the sequel to something that during the first Trump term was a huge success, which is Water Reuse Action Plan.
This is true. Yeah, actually, just in about an hour or so, we'll be announcing Water Reuse Action Plan 2.0. which is very important for the environment. It's very important for industry. There's so much use of water in industry. We hear it with the data centers, with AI, for the energy sector. And to be able to maximize the effective use through these systems is absolutely critical. There's a lot of focus when you talk data centers on the amount of energy capacity that is needed. A lot of people talk about the power, and there's not enough focus on the water impact. And in the first Trump administration, there was an announcement of Water Reuse Action Plan, what was 1.0. But so much has happened over the course of the last 6 years, and great experience from across the country allows us to update this plan, and we're looking forward to announcing it in an hour.
Fantastic.
I guess we just announced it now.
Yeah, I guess you just announced it right here. Well, more to follow from the EPA. To switch gears for a moment, though, you also made a huge announcement recently on the reversal of the 2009 endangerment finding on greenhouse gas emissions. Now, you're a veteran former attorney yourself. There's already a lot of litigation surrounding this, and there's already a lot of legal analysis speculating could eventually reach the Supreme Court. How confident are you as a veteran attorney in kind of the rationale behind the decision?
I'm very confident in the decision that we made. I would say I realized pretty quickly after I was nominated for this position that just about every decision I make, whether I say yes or no, someone will be suing me for that decision. I get that. This was a decision that was based off of applying the best reading of Section 202 of the Clean Air Act. There was a decision that was made back in 2009 when the Chevron doctrine was still a thing. But this is a pretty smart room. I'm sure you all are quite familiar with the Supreme Court in recent years and Loper Bright in overturning the Chevron doctrine. Now it's important for agency heads like the administrator of EPA to be applying the best available reading of the law. No longer can I get creative and look at a law and say, well, the law doesn't say I can't, so I guess that means I can. Post Loper Bright, and us applying the best available reading of the law, when you look at Section 202 of the Clean Air Act, it doesn't say anything about combating global climate change. As a matter of fact, the decisions to regulate emissions were done based off of analyzing local and regional impacts. This was the first time that they were looking globally. And there was a bunch of other aspects of how they reached this conclusion back in 2009. But yes, we feel confident in the decision. It was a process that included a public comment period and a very robust, many hundred-page preamble and a proposal, as well as in the final decision. This is something where we didn't just wake up one day and just decide that we're going to sign off on it that afternoon. This is a long time coming.
And I mean, I imagine this will likely reach the Supreme Court, and that could take years, possibly long after you yourself are at EPA. Are there preparations for that already happening?
Well, I would say with every single act of litigation that we're involved with, we instantly lean into defending the merits of the decisions that we make. There are many suits all across the entire country. A lot of our decisions end up getting litigated right here inside of the DC Circuit, but not all of them. This decision was an announcement that we made with President Trump in the Roosevelt Room of the White House not that long ago. It amounts to the largest act of deregulation that's ever happened in the United States. It helps to make vehicles $2,400 per new vehicle more affordable. And I would say that while we've had a lot of announcements since I came into the position, I wouldn't want it to ever get lost on anyone that we, with great pride, believe that the best announcement that we've made in the last 15 months was on the one-year anniversary of President Trump's term in office. We released a list of our top 500 environmental actions, accomplishments from that first year. Our core mission is protecting human health and the environment. The first pillar for us of powering the Great American Comeback is to pursue clean air, land, and water for all Americans. And while we have a number of other aspects of that agenda of powering the Great American Comeback, there are other pillars. We'll never lose sight of that first pillar and fulfilling our statutory obligations and ensuring that we're following the best available reading of the law, and also honoring the Supreme Court's decision in cases like West Virginia versus EPA and Michigan versus EPA with the major policies doctrine, where if there's a really big regulatory decision that's going to be made, if you're talking about imposing trillions of dollars of regulation after that 2009 endangerment finding was passed, that is a decision that Congress should have a debate on and have a vote on. And just because Congress might lack the will to have that debate and that vote to pass it into statute, that doesn't mean that unelected heads of agencies down the street should just be imposing the trillions of dollars without the vote. And that's what the Supreme Court ruled in the major policies doctrine of those cases.
Moving on to another pillar of regulatory action, which is drinking water, microplastics, and pharmaceuticals. There was a recent big EPA announcement, a proposal to impose new limits on that. There's a different kind of chemical, colloquially called PFAS, though, where there has been quite a bit of regulatory relief offered to chemical companies on PFAS. And MAHA, Make America Healthy Again advocates, want more strict action, more from EPA. I'm wondering, are you considering doing more in response to that on PFAS? What is the current state of your views there?
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing a lot on PFAS. First you referenced the microplastics, and we made this announcement with Secretary Kennedy here a couple of weeks ago at EPA. Microplastics and pharmaceuticals and PFAS and more added to the contaminant candidate list, CCL6, that we were announcing, and HHS had an initiative that they announced the same day through ARPA-H, a major funding investment as it relates to combating microplastics. As far as PFAS goes, this is something that I've been very involved in since my time in Congress. I represented the district with a bunch of PFAS issues. I voted for the PFAS Action Act. I was a member of the PFAS, founding member of the PFAS Task Force. And we've been across all different, there are so many different program offices at EPA every day working on PFAS, from research to regulation and more. As far as I would say the highest profile action that was in front of us that we had to make a decision on is that there was a compliance date coming up on PFOA and PFOS that when I was going through the confirmation process and I was meeting with senators on both sides of the aisle, we were talking about the thousands of water systems that are going to have to come into compliance, the major cost that they were going to face. We have a wide range of water systems across this country. Some are, in big places, very well funded. Some are in other areas that are struggling. And we believe in the model of polluter pays, and that ratepayers shouldn't have to pay to clean up PFAS contamination in their own drinking water supply. And right now you have two laws that we had to choose from. One is called RCRA, one is CERCLA. CERCLA has more teeth. The problem is that when both of these laws were written, neither of them were written cleanly for PFAS. Now I chose to go with the stricter version of it in PFAS contamination, so we went down the CERCLA path. However, there is this concern that exists right now in these water systems that under the current law, they would have to bear the cost, the water system, and then the water system would have to pass off the cost to the ratepayer. So Congress is well aware of this, and this is on Congress to pass new legislation to ensure that ratepayers aren't going to have to clean up PFAS contamination in their own drinking water supply. That's point one. The other point that's very relevant in this decision-making process, because we ultimately decided to give a 2-year extension for these water systems to come into compliance. That was really the high-profile action that gets to the heart of what you spoke about, although I don't want to oversimplify things. The other piece of this is that every single day, the weeks that pass, the months that have passed, while I've been serving as EPA administrator, I constantly have people and companies coming to me talking about their new technology to destruct PFAS, to be able to clean up PFAS from drinking water at less cost, to be able to clean contaminated soil at less cost. Perfect example, I visited Richardson in Alaska, where they are moving in Alaska contaminated soil previously to the lower 48 that costs a lot of money. it becomes cost prohibitive. But they have companies now. In this case, it was one company with a prototype cleaning up 6,000 tons of contaminated soil. But by doing that process, they learn lessons that allow them to update their prototype, and it becomes more economical for them to scale up and to clean a more contaminated soil. As this technology continues to improve, our hope is that when these water systems are coming into compliance, that it costs drastically less money than if they had to clean it up today. And by the way, there are a lot of water systems that are in compliance, and there are a lot of water systems that aren't going to wait because they're in a stronger financial system, a stronger financial position. The issue is with the water systems that are not in as strong as position. They want Congress to change passive receiver, and they're hoping to utilize the new technologies that are coming online.
So is part of your message to the MAHA advocates who want to see more, like, let's work with Congress? I mean, if there's members of the president's base who want this, and probably some Democrats too, maybe this can happen?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And there are people to work with in Congress on both sides of the aisle, leaders who are very well aware of the issue, some who were raising it to me, educating me about water systems in their state and why this is so important. So yes, absolutely.
Got it. Related MAHA question on one of this block's top priorities, glyphosate. There's an October 1st deadline for EPA to complete its review. Is that on track?
There is a review that's going on that needs to be completed in 2026. This is something that it continues to move. It's on track. Right. And we want to follow gold standard science. We want to be fully transparent with the public on the findings that come back. And also be better in how we communicate with the public. And no knock on, by the way, the EPA is filled up with amazing, dedicated scientists. They've been at the agency from 5 years to 20 years to 30 years. They love their job. They care about the core mission, and they are really amazing, selfless servants. Their good work, I would say, for too long hasn't been communicated effectively enough with the public. We have web pages that are technical, that if you are a MAHA mom or dad, for example, you go to the web page, you might not be finding all the answers you're looking for. And my message to our team is that even though this is a little bit of a change of culture from the way they've been in the past, it's important to update these pages. And instead of ignoring the study that it might seem like an outlier, or maybe the methodology had a sample size that was too small, maybe it was only 50, maybe the exposure level was 100x what is reality. You don't just ignore this study and not talk about it. You actually have to put that study on the page, because that's the study that American is going for, looking for an answer. So I would say the way that we communicate is also important. The research is key. Follow the gold standard science, follow the best available science, but also improve the way it's communicated to the public.
Well, we're basically out of time, but I will slip in a lightning round question. And that is, there's always a lot of cabinet shuffle, members of both parties after midterm elections. Any chance you want to make some news and say you'd like to stay on for the full administration? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I thoroughly, this is the best job I've ever had. I enjoy this position every minute of every day. It does keep me up at night. There are times I wake up in the morning and I realized that I must have been dreaming about something about EPA overnight, because I figured something out that the day before we were trying to work through, and I just really enjoy every aspect of it. It's been extremely rewarding and fun. And as I mentioned, this is an agency with 12,500 employees, and the American taxpayer who invests their hard-earned tax dollar into this agency's mission should rest assured knowing that this is an agency filled up with extraordinary talent in this for all of the right reasons, who love our country and our environment. And being part of this agency and that team is something that is extraordinarily rewarding.
All right, sounds like a probably. Well, thank you, sir. We really appreciate it. It's all the time we have.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending today's live journalism, and to our partner Chevron. We hope to see you here for our afternoon programme at 1:30 p.m.